Well, thank you very much for all being here, and this is the regular meeting of the National Assessment Governing Board, and I'm John Engler. This is my first meeting as the new chair, trying to replace Terry, which I will succeed him. I'm not sure at all that I can replace him, but you'll notice we've got cameras here today, so that's kind of a special feature of the AV equipment, something different happening, and the reason is we're being webcast live, and so just a reminder, the camera, the mics, they catch everything, and it's forever. So be forewarned. The National Assessment Governing Board is an independent, nonpartisan board whose members include educators, school administrators, curriculum and assessment experts, local and state school officials, business representatives, governors, state legislators, and members of the general public. So we've pretty much got the nation covered that way. Congress created the 26-member governing board back in 1988 to set policy for the National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEP, also and perhaps better known as the nation's report card. The governing board decides which subjects to test, determines achievement levels for each assessment, and communicates NAEP results to the American public, with the purpose of informing them on the progress that we're making in America's schools and how well we're preparing the rising generation to cope with the challenges of 21st century America and the 21st century world. We have work to do. The first agenda, we were delighted today. Seated beside me is the Secretary of Education, the Honorable Betsy DeVos. She's going to give us the oath of office in just a moment. We've got a couple of really quick, brief business items, but after the oath is taken by the newly appointed and the reappointed members, she's going to have a chance and desires to make a few remarks, and we're delighted to be able to hear from her this morning. And then that will be followed by a panel of very distinguished experts that we've brought together. They are from across the world, and so what they're going to be sharing with us is what's happening in the world of assessments on a global basis, and also give us, I think, a clear indication of what the challenge is in the United States in terms of what we face in terms of our own nation's competitiveness, and this is core to economic growth and I believe related to that then the prosperity indeed of our country. So what we want to do before we begin the business portion and is maybe go around the room, have all of the board members introduce themselves briefly, and that'll help the listening and the viewing audience this morning understand who we are, and let's just kind of do the name, rank, serial number kind of thing, name, title, and the role that you represent, since everybody's kind of in a slot. I'm a public member, even though I'm a former governor of the state of Michigan, John Engler, and I was governor in the state for a dozen years from 1991 to 2003, and am actually serving a second term on NAEP because I had one back in the last century, way back in the 90s, way back then. But somehow Betsy's staff learned that, dusted me off, and here I am. So, and I am a secretary's appointment to the board. So I'll skip over Betsy. We'll come back to her, go to Tanya Matthews next, and we'll go around the room that way.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Tanya Matthews. I am president and CEO of the Michigan Science Center. This is my first meeting as the vice chair for the National Assessment Governing Board, and I am a general public member.
I'm Lisa Stooks-Barry. I'm the deputy executive director at the National Assessment Governing Board.
Good morning, Alberto Carvalho, proud superintendent of Miami-Dade County Public Schools, 500,000 strong, highest performing urban district in the land.
I am Joe O'Keefe. I'm here as a private school policymaker, and I am a faculty member at Fordham University in New York, one of the best universities in the country.
So I'm Rebecca Gagnon. I am the chair of the Minneapolis Board of Education. I represent school boards for the country and also the city of Minneapolis, one of the coldest places in the world.
I'm Joe Wilhoft. I'm the former executive director of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. I'm here as a measurement expert, and I'll stop the hyperbole here because it'll get nauseating. Oh, no, or my colleague might start it up again.
Good morning. I'm Greg Cizik, professor of educational measurement and evaluation from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I am the highest performing testing and measurement expert on the campus.
My name is Andrew Ho. I am a professor at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education, and I'm also here in the role of testing and measurement expert. I can tell you my rank, but I'd be more happy to tell you about its imprecision.
I'm Kerry Snyder. I'm the one of the curriculum experts on the board, and I'm from Portland State University in Portland, Oregon.
Terry Mazzani, General Public Representative on the board here.
Fielding Ralston, I'm chairman of the State Board of Education in Tennessee and filling that slot on the board.
And I'm Linda Rosen. I'm the CEO of Change the Equation here in the business role. And apologies for being late.
And I'm Tyler Kramer. I'm a lawyer from San Diego, California, one of the nicer places. And I'm a general public representative.
I'm Carol Jago, longtime English teacher and Associate Director of the California Reading and Literature Project at UCLA, and I'm here as a content area expert.
I'm Dale Nowlin. I'm the 12th grade teacher rep on the board, and I'm a math teacher and department chair from Columbus, Indiana.
Good morning. I'm Bev Perdue. I'm the former governor of North Carolina, the best state in America. And I'm here representing the governors and the policymakers. I also have a real sweet spot that I work on professionally in technology and education.
I'm Jim Geringer, former governor of Wyoming. Alberto, we too are 500,000 strong.
Unless there's an eclipse, right?
Unless there's an eclipse, and then we're 1.5 million strong. And they all were in that 70-mile wide band of total eclipse, but they all got along. We're the state of high altitudes, low multitudes, great attitudes. And unlike John, well, John, I guess if they dusted you off, we call you Dusty. And I'm in remediation in my second term.
Good morning. I'm Alice Peisch. I'm a state representative from Massachusetts, where I chair the House Committee on Education, and I'm here as the Democratic state legislator.
Good morning and aloha. I'm Frank Fernandez from Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm principal representative and the proud principal at Kaimiki Middle School.
Good morning. I'm Chastity White. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the state of Alabama, and I serve in the role of 8th grade teacher on the governing board.
Good morning. I'm Ken Wagner, Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education in Rhode Island, and I represent the state chiefs.
Good morning again. Peggy Carr, Acting Commissioner in your National Center for Education Statistics.
And Bill Bashaw, privileged to serve as this governing board's executive director.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Very, very efficient round there. The first order of business is just to approve the meeting agenda. Apparently, that's a perfunctory step, so Jim Geringer moves, supported by, there we go, Rebecca. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that carries. The second is the minutes from the 2017 board meeting. So, Terry, I assume you've checked those over. I wasn't part of the board then, so are they good?
That is correct, Mr.
All right.
Chair.
Move the approval by Terry, supported by Joe is supporting that. All right, very good. All in favor? All right, those are approved. Now let's get on to the exciting part here, the oath of office. I think, Betsy, I'm going to do a little introduction of you first, and then you can do the oath, and then after that, we'll just let you keep the floor. But Betsy is somebody that I've known for a number of years, and I've known her in a lot of different capacities, but one that's been consistent throughout her public life has been her tireless advocacy on behalf of children and for the expansion of educational opportunities for students in Michigan and across the nation, and particularly students who have been disadvantaged educationally. And so her interest was certainly sparked in part by a family where there was a mom that was a public school teacher, a mother-in-law who was early in her life was also a teacher. For 15 years, Secretary DeVos served as an in-school mentor for at-risk kids in the Grand Rapids, Michigan public schools. She's worked every day, I think, to work on behalf of empowering families and parents to be able to make the best choices for the support and the education of their children. And I must say I was impressed that she was persuaded to put aside a really pretty darn nice life and come down here and take on this Herculean task of heading the Department of Education and speaking on behalf of America's children every day. But I thank you for that, and thank you for your public service. And we, especially as a board, appreciate your willingness to come here, administer the oath of office today to swear us in. And on behalf of those who are new appointments, thank you for our appointments. And thank you also for sharing some of your thoughts later on today. So I think with that, the oath is...
We're going to adjourn to the podium up here.
Oh, we're going to... What?
We're going to move up to the podium.
We are. Who's going to move? All of us?
Yeah, our new appointees.
Oh, the new appointees.
And our reappointees will come up to the podium.
Oh, all right. We have our directions from Mr. Bashaw. So to the podium.
Well, it's an honor to administer the oath to these new members today, and I will ask you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, your name, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. So help me God. Thank you. Well, thank you. First of all, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all this morning on a nice sunny day. Thank you, Governor Engler, for your introduction. I must say that it feels really unusual to have you introducing me because I have typically introduced you over the years. I've had the privilege of serving and working with Governor Engler for many years. And it's a particular joy to welcome him to this board and to have been able to administer his oath of office as well as those of all of the new members. I'm confident that this board will benefit mightily from his leadership. While Governor Engler served on the board before, as you know, this is his first time as chair. And I'm also so delighted to welcome the board's other new members. You saw them a moment ago, but let me just repeat them again. First of all, Chairman Governor John Engler, Governor Beverly Perdue, Greg Cizik, Tyler Kramer. And did I miss anyone?
Governor Geringer.
Yes, Governor Geringer. Thank you. And Dana Boyd also is a new member but couldn't be with us today. We are really grateful for the experience and insight that all of you bring to ensure that our nation's report card provides relevant and timely information to help educators meet the individual needs of their unique students. You are each asked to join this board because of your commitment to improving education achievement and because of your perspectives and your expertise. I'm confident you will access all of these qualifications and put them at the service of our nation's students. The National Assessment of Educational Progress program is an important partnership. Members of the governing board work in close collaboration with the assessment experts who develop, administer, and report. Together, the National Assessment Governing Board and the National Center for Education Statistics make NAEP the gold standard in assessment, and they provide the nation with the data we need to measure student outcomes over time, as well as highlighting opportunities for improvement. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the role that then Secretary and now Senator Lamar Alexander played in establishing the governing board almost 30 years ago. We remain indebted to Senator Alexander and others for envisioning the important role of an independent, policy-setting governing board in stewardship of the nation's report card. What's great about education in America is that it isn't centrally planned or governed. States are free to meet the needs of their individual students. And what's great about the nation's report card is that every state voluntarily uses the same yardstick to learn from one another. We view the nation's report card as a unique and invaluable source of data. And we know that state education leaders find the data important as they focus on improving student achievement. Comparisons by state, district, region, and by student subgroups tell us about what's working and, importantly, what isn't. The report card also creates a sense of healthy competition and bragging rights among states, particularly when their students demonstrate growth gains. The governing board launched a strategic vision last year to help spur schools to innovate more and to improve how NAEP informs the public. The board's vision statement has it right. The educational landscape of the 21st century demands increased academic ambition, greater technological sophistication, improved civic participation, and expanded global perspectives for all students. That means new approaches and encouraging even the best to do better. Today's meeting exemplifies the board's receptivity to learning from others and openness to new innovation. Andreas Schleicher from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and Dirk Hastedt, Executive Director of the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement, are here today, along with other distinguished panelists, to share what other countries and international assessment programs are doing to advance student achievement. I'm excited about their presence and participation, and I know that we will benefit from the results of today's discussions. NAEP has played an important role in the development of assessments abroad, and NAEP continues to look around the world for ideas and approaches that have value for students here in America. This board has an important task ahead, but I know Governor Engler never shies away from a big challenge, and I know the rest of the board will not either. I applaud your efforts, and I'm grateful, board members, for your service. Thank you very much.
Well, we've been given the opportunity to ask a few questions, so I call any of the board, maybe just kind of signal if you would like me to recognize you, or we'll just, who wants to, anybody comment, question? Governor Geringer, you're always ready to go at the drop of a hat.
I forgot to tell you, I didn't go to bed till 3 o'clock last night. I was out partying late, I guess. No, I was particularly attuned to your use of the word innovate, Madam Secretary. I think that's one of the keys that the governors have all focused on over the years, and certainly as we've continued work in what we do to improve. And I liked your other focus on improving student achievement. So I think innovation and student achievement are two key words I picked up that I very much am interested in how we can help further that same initiative, if you will. So you can turn that into a question if you'd like.
Well, thank you, Governor. Yes, I mean, I think it's very clear that the world around us has changed significantly in the last several decades, and yet many of our approaches to education have remained very similar. The fact that we still operate to a large extent on a system that was brought to us 150 years ago by a nation that no longer exists It was the right model and it worked well at the time, but we have a responsibility, I think, to help keep pushing those at the local level in particular to try new approaches and new ways to meet individual students' needs. Recently, I took a back-to-school tour, so to speak, and we visited a number of schools across the heartland of our country, a total of 16 in 4 days, and the focus of each of the schools that we were visiting was a unique approach to meeting the needs of individual students. All of them had very different personalities and profiles as a school, and yet all of the students that were attending them, the parents first of all chose for their children chose to be there, and the students were thrilled with the opportunity to be there and were obviously very excited about their learning. We want that for every student, don't we? We want every student to be excited about going to school in the morning and learning, and maybe it's not going to school in the morning. Maybe it's going to school in the afternoon. I don't know. But we have to be open to innovation and different approaches to helping kids learn for today's 21st century needs.
I'd like to throw a softball to Governor Perdue, because one of the key initiatives for innovation is the productive use of technology. And I know Governor Perdue has been quite involved with that. And I might just pass the ball to her for that follow-up.
Madam Secretary, only Governor Geringer would hijack your time to talk to this group.
That's okay.
So I will pass on that answer, other than to say that I applaud the work of many of you in your states incorporating some type of digital learning and teaching into your content during the day. I think it's imperative that the country, and perhaps you would lead this effort, I was going to ask this question, we have to have connectivity in every state in America, total broadband connectivity to every school child in America. And that can't come from a former governor, it can't come from me, from anybody but somebody in your position in the FCC. A lot of us have spent 2 years working, but none of this stuff. We learned yesterday that when Peggy does the testing, she has to carry around her own connectivity system in a suitcase. Mm-hmm. That's absurd in the 21st century in America, and we would urge you to lead on that.
Thank you, Governor. And, as we talk about improved infrastructure, this clearly is an area that has to be part of that focus, doesn't it? I think especially of a lot of the rural areas that don't have the kind of access that they really need to have, and for students that aren't able to access the kind of classes that they might be able to with that kind of technological capability. So, very important point. And I would just also throw out here, I don't know how much you've done in the area of assessments for personalized learning and or mastery and competency, but I feel like that's a really important direction that a lot of teaching for students or a lot of learning for students needs to take. And I think looking more closely at those opportunities, the notion that students should be able to move ahead as quickly as they can in subject areas or take a little longer if they need to, and not measuring seat time as the measure of growth and achievement versus how they actually master the concepts that they have to have for the future.
Dr. Matthews has a question, but before I go to her, I want to put one thing on the table that kind of came up yesterday that I think relates to something that you and Secretary Acosta have been working on. Your focus on sort of career and technical education and workforce readiness is a critical part of education, because today the blue tech jobs that are going to be so numerous and really pay so well may not need a 4-year or even 2-year degrees, but certain specific competencies. One of the things that we talked a little bit about, and Peggy Carr brought this up in a presentation, is she reported on a federal project that had come to its conclusion on looking at data and data use, that there are some barriers in terms of how we can use data, and we've asked for a bit of a follow-up to kind of try to understand what some of those are. Some of those may be fixable even by departmental action without even needing to go to Congress. Others may be a little bit more complex than that. In addition, at the state level, a number of state governors and state legislatures are embarking on initiatives to try to do a better job of understanding what happens to the student who may not go directly to college but goes to the workforce, and what the economic impact is given their level of preparedness. And so there's a kind of an interesting project that's in there, and it's relevant perhaps to maybe even some of the data that we report. So I guess two points in making this. One is we're I think anxious to continue to support the efforts on the broad workforce, not just that young person who might be headed off to matriculate at a four-year college, and at the same time we want to work in a cooperative way on removing, if there are data barriers that would help us from getting a more robust set of facts out there in front of the American people, which the federal law charges the board with doing. We want to be able to accomplish that. So
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think about one of the schools that I visited in Gary, Indiana, a charter school that partners with, they call it Gary Middle College, and students in this high school are earning college credits as they're completing their high school requirements. And one of their students actually earned her bachelor's degree while in high school, and still had to put in the seat time to graduate high school after she had earned the bachelor's degree. So those kinds of, sort of false barriers to the future, I think we need to look very carefully at, and we need to be removing impediments and, frankly, exposing students from even a younger age to a multitude of pathways to beyond high school.
Tanya?
Madam Secretary, I am, friendlier microphone. Madam Secretary, I am really intrigued by your openness and curiosity about individualized community, individualized student learning, and the different ways we sort of take on those talent challenges and tasks. In your travels and the things that you've looked at and wanted to see, have you come to any sort of thoughts or aspirations about innovative informal education partnerships within our school system, such as places like the Michigan Science Center, and really thinking about hands-on learning and relevant real-life experiences, even beyond our classic, shall I say, career and technical training?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had the opportunity to visit a number of really unique schools that have approached some of these curiosities differently. And I think about Lincoln, Nebraska's Zoo School, which is a high school located at the zoo. Science focus there. They have a number of other focused high schools in Lincoln that students can elect to take part in. And that was a really, it was great to be there and hear from the students. They were invested in their learning because they were choosing to be there, and they were excited about what they were learning and how they were learning it. And the first school that I visited on that tour, Casper, Wyoming, 25 years of, yes, Governor Garinger, yes. When we reached out to say, we'd like to come and start our tour in Casper, the people were like, seriously, really? Casper, Wyoming? But, too often communities like Casper and smaller towns across this country are sort of forgotten in this discussion. And it was great to go to the elementary school we visited there, because for 25 years, this particular school has been totally teacher-led. There are no administrators. And they have, in the past few years, shifted to a personalized learning model. And in doing so, have partnered with the parents to ensure that there was buy-in in that regard, and also more broadly with the community and the businesses that are part of that community. The students there, to a person, were thrilled with the opportunities they had to pursue their learning at their own pace and their own speed. And that's just a couple of examples that come to mind. But yeah, everywhere there are opportunities. I think it's really important that we make sure impediments are removed for local communities and local schools to be able to partner and put their own unique stamp and personality on the needs of that community and that body of students.
We've got Dr. Ho and then.
Thank you. I'm interested in sort of your thoughts on the breadth of our portfolio in terms of the subjects that we assess. There's I think, a lot of focus on mathematics and reading. Certainly, those are the primary state comparisons that we pay attention to. But there are other subjects: U.S. history, civics, geography. We have economics. We have technology and engineering literacy. And so I'm just interested in how you see the sort of the portfolio and what subjects in particular you might want to see emphasized more, perhaps by assessment at the state level, or should we maintain our steadfast focus on reading and mathematics in particular every other year?
That's a really good question, and I think that's a really good one for this board to discuss and debate. I guess from my personal perspective, I feel like we have probably a greater opportunity for students to know and understand the foundations of this country and have a better understanding more broadly of civics. I feel like there's not been the kind of focus on that in recent years. I'm not sure I'm here to advocate for a specific test in that regard, but I think that that is an area that we've sort of fallen short on more broadly. And as we look to the future, the students that are rising are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, and it's important that they know and understand, where they came from and sort of have that perspective to be able to assume leadership in the future.
I think
To follow up first on your comments on technology, I think I'm the only one here who has students back home that are meeting today without me, and I can actually get online and see how they're progressing on the assignment that I left, and I can communicate with them, and they can communicate with me while I'm here. But my question, besides my role as a teacher, I also hire teachers, and the last 3 math teachers I hired were not certified to teach high school math because in Indiana we have a pretty severe teacher shortage, and I don't think we're alone in that. So I wonder if you'd just share your thoughts on nationally the teacher shortage and what we can do.
Well, I think, clearly I've heard and read a lot about that concern, and I think that your creativity around finding alternatives and solutions is important. I think that there are opportunities to engage individuals who are very qualified to teach a specific subject based on their own life experience and professional experience. I think that's certainly one avenue. I think another avenue, I think we have not really probably honored teachers as much as we should in many ways, and I think that we have an opportunity to really encourage young people to think about the teaching profession in a new way, but I think especially so in the context of having more ability to be creative and innovative in how individual teachers have the opportunity to do their thing in the classroom. A few months ago, I convened a group of teachers who had been Teachers of the Year in their district or their state and who were no longer in the classroom. While they acknowledged that they loved being in the classroom, they were no longer there. I wanted to understand why. And almost to a person, it was because after they had served in a role as, Teacher of the Year and done some of the speaking around that and so forth, they came back and were sort of told, okay, you did that now just go be in your place and do your thing and don't do anything outside of the bounds of what you're told to do every day. And one of them I still remember, he said, if I wasn't on page 72 of my textbook with the students on, this specific day, I was chastised. And they just, I think they just became very frustrated. And so that is a dynamic that we really have to challenge. And I think we need to really empower teachers, good teachers, to be really good at what they do.
All right, good chat. We'll give Chelsea the last question down there. I think we're kind of at the end, but to Alabama.
Thank you so much, Secretary DeVos, for visiting schools and speaking with students and teachers. And I wanted to talk about how, as each state contributes their own ESSA plans, have you seen any commonalities as far as the personalized learning or innovation that it seems that all states have incorporated that you would like to shed light on?
Well, as you know, there's about 36, 37 of them that are in review right now. So to be honest, I've not seen a lot of detail around them, but I have continued to advocate for states to take this opportunity to think creatively and innovatively, and then for each state to actually do so with their local districts and local communities. I think if Congress was really intentional about wanting to move flexibility and power back to the states, I think it's incumbent on states to also do the same thing within their state. And I think that we're going to see a lot more creativity around approaches to kids and their learning in doing so. So to specifically answer your question, I haven't seen a common theme, but I'm very hopeful that as the plans get implemented, we're going to see a lot more creativity.
Well, Madam Secretary, thank you very much for spending this time with us. We hope that over the course of this board's service, the next coming months and years, that we'll have an opportunity to talk again, and that as we work through a strategic plan that was so skillfully prepared before I arrived here and begin to look at those components, there'll be parts where we'll come back and perhaps need your help, and we'll be looking forward to talking with you. Thank you.
I look forward to it too as well. Thanks, Chairman Engler.
What I'll ask is the international panel begin to make their way here. I'm going to come and get my notebook, and so we'll have about a 60-second pause here while the panelists assemble. Well, first, again, let me just thank the Secretary and thank the members for the questions, and we move on to the very substantive portion of our meeting today that focuses on our international assessments administered by other countries. So we are truly looking beyond the U.S. borders, and what we've got today is a panel of experts who are going to share their knowledge of current student assessment practices around the world. We're going to talk about how those assessments and the changes that they're experiencing and the priorities they're setting have an impact on the future. I'm going to begin by introducing the panelists this morning. First, starting at home, is Peggy Carr, the Acting Commissioner of NCES. Peggy, in her role, oversees collection, analysis, and reporting of education data from preschool through post-secondary education. Peggy is one of the nation's leading experts on student assessment and has directed the NAEP assessment for more than a few years. It actually says decades here. I don't wish to date her, but that really is factually correct. The next to Peggy is a good friend that I've had the privilege of working with at the National Association of Manufacturers and most recently at the Business Roundtable, and that's Andreas Schleicher. And Andreas is the Director for Education and Skills and a special advisor on education policy to the Secretary General at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation, headquartered in Paris. And Andreas is also known as the father of PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. And so he is a man very familiar with what we're doing here, but certainly highly versed in how the international and U.S. systems are complementary and at the same time very different too. Dirk Hastedt is the Executive Director of the International Association for Evaluation of Educational Achievement, otherwise known as IEA. And Dirk's organization is an independent cooperative of national research institutions and government research agencies. IEA conducts large-scale studies of educational achievement, including tests that we're quite familiar with, the TIMSS 2003, TIMSS 2007, and PEARLS 2006. Petra Stanat is academic director of the Institute for Educational Quality Improvement, IQB. There will be a test on the acronyms as you leave, and those who can answer will get lunch, so pay attention. But IQB is at Humboldt University in Berlin, and Petra's research activities focus on measuring conditions and supports of immigrant students' educational success. And this has highly relevant to us because part of that is regarding second language acquisition. Importantly, I think also Petra is going to discuss some of the efforts in Germany to improve their methods for assessing student achievement. And at the end of the row of this impressive lineup is Dr. Bill Schmidt. And Bill is University Distinguished Professor, founder and director of the Center for the Study of Curriculum, and director of the Education Policies Center at none other than my alma mater, Michigan State University. And Dr. Schmidt's work is truly global. He focuses at the current time on academic content in K-12 schooling. He's also involved in supporting China and improving their methods of assessing student achievement. So you can see we truly do have global experts, and we're delighted to have all of them with us today. So we're going to outline today's program. I think there's a slide that should be there. I don't know if the slide there is the slide right there that we're looking at. And I'll start with an overview that'll be brief. Then we're going to give the panelists time to offer their insights. Peggy, Andreas, Dirk. Dirk's going to share trends in student assessments of TIMSS and PEARLS. And after Dirk, we're actually going to take a little bit of a break, and then you'll be ready for Petra and Bill. And so then there'll be a discussion. So this is pretty much going to be the whole morning. There'll be an opportunity, and we're going to try to leave plenty of time for that with a Q&A when the board members, you get a chance to ask your questions, and we'll hope to have time for the audience to get into a number of questions. And so we want to run this until 12:30. We're going to encourage people to join the conversation on Twitter. Maybe we can have some of those students out there in Indiana even checking in with us. I don't know, but the hashtag, if you're going to go on Twitter, the hashtag is NAEP, N-A-E-P. Background, just a little bit of background that's been prepared by Bill and his team for me to kick this off with. It really goes to focus initially on the late and awesome Mitchell Chester. And as you know, he was the commissioner of elementary and secondary education in Massachusetts. Very untimely death earlier this year, the end of June. Passionate about the work of NAGB, and Mitchell's focus, and really was a kind of a laser-like focus on how do we close opportunity and achievement gaps. And he did this coming from the state that is number one in their results, Massachusetts. They stand atop the nation. And second, he wanted to know how we could better connect the nation's report card to the international assessments. And that includes those we're going to discuss today, PISA, TIMSS, PEARLS. So his leadership and certainly influence, and then strong support of Terry, and Terry, we thank you for that. Terry was getting a lot of kudos yesterday, and it would take actually many more days of acknowledgement of the work that he did during his time as chair, but they're all woven into that strategic vision that I mentioned to the secretary and that the board's very familiar with, which was unanimously adopted by the board actually a year ago at the November meeting. So that's up there. It's on our website for anybody who happens to be watching at home or listening. You want to see it, you can go to the NAGB website. There it is. So through the deliberative process, the board identified 10 priorities, and one of those is specifically our focus today. And that priority, and we call it the Mitchell-Chester priority. That's how it's become known inside NAEP, how it's become known inside Peggy's office. But it is, quote, research assessments used in other countries to identify new possibilities to innovate the content, design, and reporting of NAEP. That's pretty straightforward. And so why do we need to know more? Why should we want to know more as a governing board? Why should the country care about what's going on in international assessments? Well, I think the most obvious, speaking from my old role as head of the Business Roundtable, we're in a global competition for talent. And we need to know where's the talent, who's got it, who's developing it, and business is trying to figure out how do we get it. And for a nation, the choices are pretty straightforward. You either grow your own, or you have the kind of immigration policy that allows you to attract somebody else's, or you're going to have to go and find it. And you can imagine that third option is pretty catastrophic for the economic future of any nation if you lose all of your company and your innovation to someplace else. So we want to know what are the strategies that are being used. NAEP has been a leader in representative student assessment around the world, but we certainly can't lean on what we've done in the past. We better be looking ahead to the future, and we sure better be open to learning from others. And so one of the reasons that I was excited about coming back to the governing board was to kind of see if it was the case, and it was back then, that the board really worked not just trying to lead, but trying to learn. And so today, the learning opportunity for the board and for the ability to influence our policymaking in the future is what are they doing? What are other assessment programs in other nations developing? What are we going to have to do to keep up? Or how do we continue to be at the fore? And what can we do to help all youth be better prepared for the future? So we're going to start with Peggy. She's going to talk about how the U.S. works with international student assessments. And then after Peggy's done, as I said, we'll go to Andreas and Dirk, and then we'll take a quick break. And that's what we're going to do. So Peggy, you go right ahead. And I'm going to turn the podium over to you. Peggy Carr.
Thank you, Governor. And a hearty welcome to a rich and diverse audience today. And thank you to my friends and colleagues in the international community for coming here today, making such a long trip to be with us. We really appreciate it. And Bill, there at the end, we have been friends, and you have been a friend of NCES for decades, and I am hoping in the course of this presentation today, you're going to tell us a little bit about how you worked with NCES to rescue Tims from the Canadians back in the day. Petra, we just met this morning, but I can tell you, your reputation preceded you. Your outstanding reputation, I should say, in your work with PISA. So I look forward to your talk today as well. So I'm going to start my talk with reminding you of the headlines that everyone in this country sees when NCS releases results from these international assessments that we conduct. Here's one. American schools versus the world. Expensive, unequal, bad at math. Here's another one. America's high school graduates look like other countries' high school dropouts. And what about this one? When it comes to tech skills, we're not as good as we think. Well, these headlines are not just here in America, they're all over. It's not just us talking about these findings. I'll try to interpret one here from a French newspaper. PISA results show French students are average. Here's another one from the Australian newspaper. Schools continue to fall behind in math and science. And what about UK? What are they saying? One of the newspapers of record there. In this post-truth world, PISA scores matter more than ever. So today, what I would like to do is to take a deeper dive beyond these headlines that we see here and share with you why we are conducting these assessments here in the United States and what we have learned over years of participating in conducting these assessments here. I am frequently asked by others, why are we participating in conducting all of these assessments here in the United States? What do we get out of comparing ourselves? We are a big, very heterogeneous country to smaller and perhaps more homogeneous countries. What do we know? Well, I can tell you, we have learned a lot over the years, and particularly as we compare these results in conjunction with our nation's report card. So my goal for the first part of my talk is to share with you 5 big picture insights that we have gained from across these studies over the years. Number 1, American students tend to struggle more in mathematics than in reading or science. You're probably familiar with this particular one from our Exxon Mobil commercials that we hear all the time. Or perhaps you've read the Amanda's Ripley's Smartest Kids in the World. Well, this result is actually true. And what I want to show you is the data that backs it up. I want to first orient you to this slide. Across the top, we have grades 4 and 8. That comes from TIMSS. And then we have age 15. Those are PISA results. And then you have the adult results. That is out of PIAC, the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies. That number you see there in parentheses represent the number of education systems that actually participated in those assessments. And that's an important number because it's the denominator. And we're going to use that to understand our rankings. And the rows here, of course, represents the subjects are reading, science, and math. And inside of the cells are the rankings for the United States. Well, the first thing I want to bring your attention to is the math. We actually do, relatively speaking, in math, as you can see here, than is the case in reading and science. Take a look at that 38 there for age 15 out of PISA. That's 38 out of 72 education systems and that we ranked. So what that means is that 37 education systems actually scored higher than we did in 2015. 2, we see stronger performance from our younger students. Now, if you were looking closely at that last slide, you might have noticed that we didn't do too bad in the reading for the 4th grade. I'm actually going to show you the same slide, but I'm going to orient you in a different way for the results. Again, 4th, 8th, and 15-year-olds and adults, and we have the subjects here. Take a look at 4th and 8th grade and compare the rankings. They're actually better, relatively speaking, than the rankings for the peers in high school and for the adults. And when you consider the education systems that are participating in the PIAC on the adult column here, these results are really, they're giving us some food for thought, 17 out of 22. And these are some of the leading economies in the world, Japan and the Republic of Korea and Canada and most of the European Union. Number 3, while other countries improve, the United States is losing ground. And this is a very interesting finding because it's important to note that this is not necessarily because the United States is declining in performance. It's because other countries are improving more rapidly than us. Show you the data that supports that. This is a nice chart. What you see here on this slide are scores for TEM mathematics between 1995 and 2015. The U.S. is there in the middle. You see that orange. It's in the center, and it shows that we had steady but significant progress over these 2 decades of 21 points. Small but significant and steady, a little more than a point a year. But some countries are catching up. Look at the Portugal number here. They were far behind us in 1995, but their 4th graders have now caught up. 99 points over this 2 decades. That's pretty impressive. And there are also other countries that are making a lot of progress and increasing the difference between them and us. Here I have an example for you. This is Hong Kong, China. You see that they have improved 58 points, almost 60 points over this time period. They were ahead of us, and now they are leaving us. I have another example, and I particularly like this one because what we're going to do here is to hold constant the countries, and that's important, over the time period, and we're going to see what the rankings look like for the United States. So the PISA results that we released here in 2015 showed a decline for the math literacy. From 2012 to 2015, there was a decline. And those results are mirrored here in the rankings. Our ranking was 28 in 2012 and now is 35. But what's most interesting about these results is what was happening around the United States. 7 education systems that were equal to the United States in 2012. In 2015 are now above us in the rank. 2 that were below us are now equal to us. These are very interesting and enlightful results and gives us some sense of what's going on here. Number 4, our top performing states are among the best education systems in the world, while our lowest performing states struggle to be competitive globally. Now, let's look at the data supporting that. Now, for those of us who have been keeping up with special studies in NAEP, you might remember in 2011, NCS conducted a special study linking NAEP results with TEM results. And we actually supported 8 or so states to actually take TEMs. And we used this special study to project the scores for all of the states for reading and math in 8th grade. The results were very interesting. And they're shown here, some of the highlights. Basically what we found is some of the top states in the country score comparably to some of the best education systems in the world. And yes, Governor, you probably aren't surprised that it was Massachusetts that scored at the top of 47 countries. Massachusetts outperformed 42 in 8th grade mathematics. So you can think about Massachusetts' performance in the neighborhood of Japan. And when you think about what systems score significantly higher than those students, there's only 4. The Republic of Korea, Singapore, and so on, as you see here in this chart. Now, on the other side of the continuum, you had our lowest performing state in 2011, that was Alabama. 19 systems. They did outperform, but they're in the neighborhood of Turkey and Romania and Norway. Interesting results. Number 5. The millennial generation surpassed the baby boomers, according to the latest Census Bureau statistics. But there's one other distinction for the millennials in this country. Despite having the highest attainment in education than any other previous generation, millennials, according to the data I'm getting ready to show you, have very weak workforce skills in literacy, problem solving, and a technologically rich environment, and in numeracy. And numeracy refers to the ability to use and apply and interpret and communicate math and gain information and ideas. Now, this is PIAC. Again, this is the adult competency assessment that I described earlier. Just think of it as functional literacy. And this particular one is on the literacy domain. You see here this blue color is the OECD average at 273. The United States here is at 270, so a bit of a difference there. This is for all of the adults. But when we bifurcate these results separately for the millennials, see how that gap widens. And look, there are less education systems below than before the United States. 274 to 282. Now I'm going to switch and talk a little bit about problem solving. Notice that the color has changed, but also notice the big gap in comparison to the literacy domain between the OECD average and the United States at 277. When we again bifurcate these data for the millennials, you can see that there is a gap there, OECD 295, and the millennials at 284, and there's only one education system below us, Poland. Lastly, numeracy, the one I described earlier. Look at the number of systems between the OECD average and the United States. 253 for the United States to 269 for OECD, and they're 2 countries below us. Millennials, well, we're dead last. So I want to say a little bit about how we work with our partners here, because it's truly a rewarding relationship, and so I want to share that very quickly with you. We support our collaboration in the international bodies by sitting on the boards and policy boards of the OECD and the IEA. We make decisions collectively about what to test, how to test it, and what the rules are. And then the countries go back home and they actually collect the data, they recruit the schools, they administer the assessment, they score the results, and they send them back to my colleagues here. They validate, make sure that we've done it right, scale it, and then we all go back home and we report our own results. So the OECD and the IEA, they have their reports. We have our reports that we release for the country, and then those newspaper headings that I showed earlier start. The international results are usually released around 4 a.m. our time and 10 a.m. Paris time, and we also release results in this country around 4 a.m. I would be remiss if I did not say a little bit about the state assessments. This is a system of assessments here in the United States. We work through our national program with the international program to get a picture of how students are doing in this country, but it would not be complete without the state assessments. And NCES, of course, is the place where we administer all of these assessments, and we're very proud that we're able to share what we learned, and there's a lot of knowledge and efficiencies between the programs. I want to also add that the history of these programs can be attributable to a lot of what happened in the early 80s, which is why I sort of signal, Bill, that we need to sort of share some of that rich history. That black box that we often talk about with NAEP, with the long tests and the short booklets where you can't really report on individual scores and only group scores are reliable, that methodology is in all of these assessments, these indicator systems that we're going to talk about today. I want to take the last few minutes, a bit of time that I have, to talk about what's coming up and what will be released out of NCES for the international assessments. You heard us talk about PEARLS and ePEARLS in December. In just a few weeks, days, we'll be releasing the results for PEARLS, and there are two interesting results. There's the paper and pencil. This is fourth grade reading if you're not familiar with PEARLS. And then there's ePEARLS, reading in a technologically rich environment. The results are in separate reports, very interesting, so watch out for those. And then the last, we have 2019 results coming out of PISA. There's a technology information literacy assessment that we recently joined. We're very interested. It'll be the first time we participated in that. Those results will be released in 2019. TIMS results will be coming up again in 2020. And there's also an international early learning assessment that we just joined as part of our international portfolio, and those results will be released in 2020. So we're excited about this relationship and our continued cooperation with these outstanding colleagues here. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much. She says I had 30 seconds. That's pretty good.
Thank you very much, Peggy. Thank you. Andreas, we offer the podium to you. Or?
First of all, thank you so much, John, for inviting me here to share our work. But I also want to express my special thanks to Peggy Carr and her incredible support for PISA over all of the years, and in fact, our whole international work at the OECD. When I'm going to introduce PISA, you're going to recognize many of the critical design features from NAEP. No? In fact, when we started with PISA in the early 90s, we didn't have anything near the R&D capacity that you have for NAEP. So we often had to rely on the Chinese version of R&D, rub and duplicate. But I want to really say that we have experienced incredible generosity from NCES in sharing their expertise, their experience during all these years. And that has allowed us to do what we can do today. In a nutshell, every 3 years, we test about 500,000 students around the world at age 15 in now over 80 countries. That number is expanding every time. And we test them in key subjects like mathematics, science, and reading, but increasingly also in more innovative assessment domains, problem-solving skills. Peggy mentioned that already. Next Tuesday, we're going to launch our first assessment of social skills, the capacity of students to work together. Very kind of innovative. Creative thinking is in the making. Financial literacy is something that we work on. So there's a lot of development going on. And one thing that makes PISA perhaps special is that we put less emphasis on whether students can simply reproduce what they have learned. We really want to test to what extent they can creatively, extrapolate from what they knew and apply their knowledge in unfamiliar, novel contexts. We put emphasis, of course, on content knowledge, but we are at least as much interested in what we call conceptual understanding or epistemic understanding. Can you think like a scientist? Can you think like a mathematician? And that's why we don't mainly rely on multiple choice tasks in PISA. Many of the tasks are open-ended, complex. In a kind of computer environment where we now operate, we can actually give students some really interesting problem-solving tasks. And in a way, that's where the PISA frameworks are. We also put more emphasis, perhaps, than NAEP on collecting rich contextual data from students, from teachers, from schools, from systems, from parents, to allow us through triangulation to contextualize the results and understand performance differences among countries. It's sort of a very important feature of the assessment because our countries really want to see what makes education system different and what they can learn from each other. Now, this is a map of the countries taking part. In gray, the OECD countries, in blue, other countries that have joined. You can see some countries are still very patchy. China and India, for example, we only have sort of certain parts covered. That's a big limitation. But we are working on this, and hopefully over time, the map becomes bluer and bluer. Our latest assessment focused on science in 2015, and the first time they put the emphasis on science was in 2006. And that may seem a very long time ago for many of us. In fact, 2006 was the year before the iPhone was invented. Twitter was still a sound. The Amazon was still a river. Many of these things we take for granted today actually didn't exist by then. And you can see in the United States, performance in science improved slightly. But then the world didn't stop. You could see, 2009 maps became dynamic, cars became electric, now they drive without a driver. And actually between 2009 and 2012, student performance in the United States remained pretty flat. And just think about the last years, cloud computing, big data, biogenetics, huge developments in the fields of science. But we cannot see that mirrored in improved conceptual understanding in science among American 15-year-olds. And in fact, what's troubling is that's true for much of the industrialized world. In fact, what you can see, the kind of flatlining educational outcomes, is what we see in many other countries in the industrialized world as well. But, Peggy mentioned already Portugal. It's an interesting country that, despite very severe limitations in resources, has been steadily improving its outcomes. Or, countries like Singapore, moving from good to great. And that's also a very important message here. Now, the high-performing education systems don't stand still to wait until everybody catches up. But actually, some of the most dynamic improvement in learning outcomes is happening at the high end of the distribution. Top-performing education systems keeping going forward. Now, some countries, or some people say that's all, unfair because, it doesn't make sense to compare countries that operate under very different social and economic circumstances, Can you compare Japan and Mexico or Finland and the United States? But PISA actually developed a very smart way around that. In fact, we collect contextual data about the student's social background. We standardize with an international metric, and now we can actually compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. Have a look at this. The red dot here is the 10% most disadvantaged on the international metric students in the Dominican Republic. The green triangle, the 10% wealthiest. And you can see there's an achievement gap. And you look at this and you might think, well, poverty influences outcomes, poverty is destiny. But the interesting story starts now. When you look at this across countries, you can see students from exactly the same family background come out so differently across countries. In fact, you look at here, the 10% of the most disadvantaged students in Estonia or Vietnam, Hong Kong, and so do as well as the average student in the industrialized world. And they do better than the 10% wealthiest students in countries in Latin America. And this is one of the most powerful illustrations, Context always matters, social background always matters. But once you take that out, you can see really the quality of learning outcomes varies hugely across countries, even under similar conditions. So that's one of the ways in which we try to compare results, bringing sort of country on a level playing field in a fair way. But here's another side of the coin. We ask students also what they want to do with their lives, to what extent they want to become scientists in their different fields. And look at this. The first thing that you have already recognized is that many of the countries that do so well in science, Japan, Korea, Finland, China, Germany, actually only a very small number of students see science as something that is opening life opportunities for them. You look at the United States. not doing so well in science, but everybody wants to become a scientist. And now you look at this and you ask yourselves, yeah, well, maybe we have to make a choice. Either we educate our children well in science or they want to become scientists. But in fact, international comparisons tell you something more about this. Have a look at this. In the red circle, I'm going to put the countries where students do well in science. In the purple ones, where students believe in science as a method of inquiry. And in blue, the ones where students want to become scientists. And the question, of course, is, do you have to make choices between those three things, or can you do this all together? And the answer is very clearly, yes, you can. Singapore, Canada, Slovenia, Australia, UK. There's a whole range of countries where students not only do really well in science, but they also see science as something for their own future. So it's not a trade-off. Then you have, of course, countries, that are just doing well on the test, but where students don't relate it to their future. The United States is in the corner where you can say students believe in science, they want to become scientists, but they're not prepared for that. And then you have countries in the remaining quadrants as well. But the important point really, it's often about the combination of the cognitive and social and emotional attributes that matter. Because actually, when you look at who is actually going to become a scientist, the social and emotional attributes are often as predictive, if not more, than the cognitive dispositions. And actually, one of the things that we found really interesting is that enjoyment in learning is a good kind of predictor for that link. If students don't like science in school, better scores are not very predictive of higher career aspirations. Where students do enjoy science, you can actually see that, better test performance relates more closely to higher career aspirations. So again, it's an illustration looking at this in multiple dimensions and measuring multiple dimensions of outcomes. Everybody often looks at the global talent pool. John, you mentioned that. What's the shape and size of the global talent pool? And the United States comes still first, but essentially because it's a large country, not because the density of scientific excellence is very high. You have only about 8.5% of students at the top end of the distribution. Next come very small provinces in China. 4 provinces in China make up almost as much as the American global talent pool at the top end, not because they have lots of students, but because students do really well in science. High density of high performance. Then comes Japan, smaller even, but here the density of excellence becomes really very good. Japan is not very good, Peggy mentioned that on the PIAC survey, in extracting value from their talent. So many of those people never get a chance in life to use their science skills. There's data for this as well. But actually it's educating its students really well. And then, next comes Germany, and the rest is about, either the countries are very small or they're doing badly in science. But this is sort of giving you a sense of the composition of the global talent pool. And of course, we monitor very carefully how that changes over time. Now, what's behind it? I want to illustrate the contextual data because I think this is an area where PISA makes a greater investment than NAEP. The first thing we all turn to is money. But you can actually see that spending per student alone is not a very reliable predictor for better outcomes. Once you reach a certain point, on the left side you can see, yes, it's a predictor. On the right side, you can actually see it's pretty much flatlining. It's more interesting when you look at how well do countries do in attracting the most talented teacher in the most challenging classrooms and aligning resources with needs. Now, you want to be really in the green area of the chart where resources, the more kind of quality resources end up in the more disadvantaged communities. But you can actually see the majority of countries, including the US, are deep in the red area, where we can actually see that social disadvantage tends to be amplified by the quality of teaching as far as can measure, or the quality of resources. So PISA actually gives you a good sense also on, how well are we doing in matching resources with needs. Spending choices. One way in which you can spend money is to pay your teacher as well. That's the green bar where it goes up relatively to other countries in the GDP. Countries invest more in teachers. And have a look at the 2 countries in the middle, Japan and Korea. They pay their teachers reasonably well. They don't have so long schooling hours that drives costs down. They give their teachers lots of time for other things than teaching. Very important resource. Someone earlier asked, what can you do to make a country, make it more attractive for people to go into teaching? It's not just a matter of making teaching financially attractive. It's also about making teaching intellectually more attractive. And you can see Japan and Korea are 2 countries that actually are investing significant resources in that. And they pay for that with larger classes. No? Large classes drive costs down. So you can actually see in a nutshell, the Japanese and the Koreans don't pay very much for education, but they spend their money in a specific way. You look at Greece, on the other side, Greece is as expensive as Japan and Korea. That's what people don't think, but it's actually a lot of investment. But, they have put all their money in, allowing teachers not to work for too long and having classes very small, but even Greece can spend its money only once. So the cost for this is actually very low teacher pay and very few hours for student learning. Probably not a very good choice. But the point I want to make is countries spending similar amounts very differently, and PISA gives us a sense of where the resources go. And then, we can look in greater depth of what are the more effective choices. And you look at the United States, the biggest cost reducer is actually that teachers spend most of their time in the classroom. But that means also they have less time for other things in teaching. Let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. On the vertical axis, I show you student-staff ratios, and how generous you are in providing teachers for students. On the horizontal axis, the class size. And you can see the two don't relate very well. Here's the United States, here's China. Both spend about the same number of teachers for every 100 students, but in China, classes are very large. Why? Because they want their teachers to do lots of other things. They only teach between 11 and 16 hours per week, and they spend at least 1 hour per week working with other teachers to frame good practice, to engage in professional development. There's a huge investment in the profession in China and many Asian countries. In the United States, to keep classes low, teachers have very little time for investing in their profession, and that's a drag on performance. So again, what PISA shows is not only how well do we do, but what are the choices that underlie different performance difference. This is another one, time. If you add 1 more hour of mathematics instruction, you get better math outcomes. You add 1 more hour of science instruction, you get better science outcomes. It's a very clear link within a country between more time and better outcomes in PISA. But when you do that across countries, it looks like this. The more time students spend in school, the worse they come out in PISA. How do you square that? Within a country, time is a positive resource. Across countries, it somehow seems to detract from resources. Of course, it's actually very simple. Learning outcomes are always the product of the quantity of learning and the quality of the learning environment. That makes really the difference. What I wanted to show you actually is the productivity. When you look at actually learning gains per hour of instruction, you can see how hugely this varies across countries. You take countries like Japan or Estonia or Finland or Switzerland, where few hours translate into very, very strong outcomes. And you take other countries where many hours don't relate into strong outcomes. So we asked teachers about all of this, quality of instruction. And look at this. You have about 95% of American teachers who say, my role as a teacher is to facilitate students' own inquiry. Or 82% students learn best by finding solutions on their own. Or 85% thinking and reasoning is more important than curriculum content. You think, wow, teachers have this highly constructive mindset. But then what PISA allows us to square that with what actually happens in the classroom. If American teachers would do what they say, you would find the United States at the bottom of the list when it comes to rote learning. But that post is already taken by Switzerland, and it comes Poland, and it comes Germany. In fact, the United States comes pretty high up on this list. Despite what teachers say about their approach to learning and the beliefs in pedagogy, the United States comes up very high when it comes to responding to short, simple tests of memorization. Had I asked you at the beginning, who comes out on top on rote learning, many might have tipped on China. But in fact, the Chinese make use of memorization, of course, but it's not predominant. In fact, when you look at China, they're also very, very good, particularly Shanghai, in actually focusing on deep learning, reasoning, intrinsic motivation, critical thinking, creativity. That's what we underestimate. So this shows you why it's important in these assessments to triangulate the perspectives of teachers, of students, of schools, to get down to the truth. And you can ask yourself, does it make a difference? Again, here you can drill down on item types. On the green side, I'm going to show you the type of PISA tasks where memorization helps you. And in red, the PISA tasks where memorization hinders learning. And you can actually see, as you move from simpler to more complex problems, For simple problems, memorization is quite good, but as the tasks get more complex, you're doing less and less well with memorization alone. Is one of the reasons why American students have such a hard time to get to the more complex problems in math that require deep reasoning and conceptual understanding. Now, control strategies, basically your capacity to learn, setting learning goals, persevering, are always a good predictor for learning outcomes across the spectrum, but also at the high end. They're not very sort of effective. At the high end, it's about elaboration strategies. You can really see if you want to really get to the most complex problem-solving tasks on PISA, students need to be able to think out of the box, to connect familiar knowledge with unfamiliar knowledge, and so on. So the point I want to make, PISA allows us not only to compare scores, but you can actually look at the type of tasks that students in different education systems are very good at and how they relate to the learning environment, instructional climate, and so on. This doesn't allow us to get to the kind of causal nature of those relationships. Now that's where other type of research needs to kick in. But actually it allows us to ask the right question. So I want to conclude my presentation with some of the design choices and trade-offs that we in PISA make. And that's often, always the hardest part that we are faced with now. The first is, everybody wants to test a lot and at great depths. But, the most severe constraint on testing is that we rarely get more than 2 hours of testing time from an individual student. Actually, we borrowed your methodology of, matrix sampling. We also now use adaptive assessment instruments. The digital assessments are tailoring the tests that students are getting so that we actually save time there. But in essence, we have a core assessment in reading, math, and science every 3 years, and then we rotate the focus. And we rotate the focus not by cutting coverage. We don't want to lose important coverage. We want to sort of cater for the complexity of the domain. We do that basically by reducing the sample size for one of those. That's a cost saving that we basically do. Then we have the innovative assessments, digital literacy, problem solving, social skills, working on an assessment of global competency, the capacity of students to work kind of in a complex intercultural work. Creative thinking, 2021. Early days, no, that's very, very hard to capture. And we're just developing a kind of conceptual framework. But essentially, we have a kind of 10-year plan where we work on this. And then we have optional assessments like financial literacy that countries can choose if they like to do this. So very, very difficult kind of trade-offs to move. This is the answer that we have. And again, we borrowed a lot from you. Very last point, the hardest challenge always is you want to measure change, but you also need to change the measures. No? Literacy is a good example. In the year 2000, when we started with assessing literacy, literacy was easy. It was about extracting information from something somebody else had written. Linear reading. And when you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia and you could trust the answer to be true. Today, you look up something on Google and you get 30,000 answers and you have to navigate the truth. Literacy has become about constructing knowledge. And so the construct has changed. And actually, mapping those changes in the assessment while keeping trend lines has been proven one of the most difficult challenges. Basically, what we need to do is to do bridging studies. We also need to do validation studies on those. That is expensive, that is difficult, and there are trade-offs. But if we have to make a choice between relevance and trends, we always go for keeping the measures up with the measures of our society. We also explore new measures first through an innovative assessment domain. So we basically firewall new assessments, we report them separately, and then if they work well, they feed into the main development. We want to keep our measures as comparable as possible and as specific as necessary. That's where the adaptive assessment instrument comes on. Also the modular context questionnaires, countries can choose, can basically configure themselves their kind of PISA tool from this. And we have our frameworks informed, but not constrained by national standards and curricula. We validate the frameworks, but actually particularly in fields like mathematics, the common denominator of national curricula is often not a good measure of what mathematics in the 21st century is about. So keeping a good balance is really, really important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Andreas, thank you very much. We'll now go to the IEA and Mr. Dirk Husted. Dirk, do you want to come to the podium?
All right. So thank you all for your interest. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And also I would underline that we have a very long-lasting and good relationship with NCS, and we are very happy and for the great support that we have throughout the years. I will now, in my 20 minutes, talk briefly about IEA and then the 4 current studies that we have, which are not only TIMSS and PEARLS, but also ICILS and ICCS. I'll be brief in the beginning and a little bit slower at the end. So you already know that IEA is a non-governmental research organization. We are founded in 1958 and have done 30 research studies of cross-national achievement since then. And we have 60 member countries, and we are operating in nearly 100 countries in our studies. IEA studies enable countries to review their achievement of the students in an international context. And I think this is very, very important. So you can compare the students' achievement to achievement of students in other countries or other groups of students, and you can look at differences and see how your differences relate to others. Although, of course, we have to be very careful with comparisons. And when we, for example, look at teaching time and see differences, we have to see that there's, of course, also differences in the system. So in Japan and Korea, as we all know, there's not only teaching taking place in school, but in Japan, the parents spend the same amount that's spent on the public system also in private tutoring after school. So I think we should be very careful with these comparisons. Anyway, what I want to know, I think international large-scale assessments are complementing national assessment and system monitoring activities. So I think both is important. You have your national focus, but the international puts it into an international perspective. And there's many reasons for doing that today that I don't need to talk about. TIMSS, I think it's the most well-known, so be brief on that one. In TIMSS 2015, we had 57 countries and 7 benchmark entities, which are sub-entities within countries. We assessed 600,000 students, so we had nearly 60 countries included. We had 3 grade levels that we assessed, grade 4, grade 8, and of grade 12. And we are doing this for 20 years now. And as I said, we started in 1958, so it's one of a relatively new study, but I think it's very good and successful. I, of course, would also want to talk about changes in curriculum, and I just want to reiterate what Andreas said before, which I think is very, very important and might be also relevant for you in your national assessment. We also want to keep trends, but we have changes in curriculum. And this poses a challenge for us, since if you don't change your measure, are you still really measuring the same if the environment and the teaching changes? So I think we have to be very careful with what is the trend if environment and teaching is changing, actually. So and I think that's something that we always have to bridge in international studies, and I assume you will have a very similar challenge also in your assessment. In 2021, which is the next cycle, we'll also offer the TIMSS electronically. And we also have problem-solving inquiry tasks, which are scenario-based, but this is still under development, and we still got, at that very moment, have a meeting of all participating countries in Melbourne, Australia. So I can show you what it actually is, because it's still under development. But it will be roughly the same. I mean, also in TIMSS, we have about 50% multiple choice items and 50% constructed response items. We also assess knowledge, applying, and reasoning, so the different domains. So it's very similar to what we heard before also about PISA. PEARLS. Again, PEARLS, we have in the current cycle 50 countries that participated, plus 14 benchmark entities. We assessed more than 300 fourth graders, so we have nearly 50 countries. We do that since 15 years, every 5 years. And It's really sensitive. And results come out, okay, that's a nice typo. On December 5th, we will have the result release, and also that's something that Peggy already mentioned. And now it's getting tricky. I heard yesterday that you like videos, so I tried to embed one too.
Each student took a randomly assigned combination of 2 of the 5 tasks. The tasks each were presented in a simulated internet environment and structured as a class project. Conceptually, they were relatively demanding, some of them based on abstract or technical ideas. Each task involved students working across approximately 3 websites, totaling 5 to 10 web pages, with an average of 1,000 words of text per task. The web pages contained visual data including photos, charts, and maps, as well as navigational and dynamic features such as animations, hyperlinks, tabs, and pop-up boxes. In the ePearl simulated internet browser window, students search for and read text. And in the assessment window, a teacher avatar introduces questions and guides students through the tasks. In the Mars task, students begin by searching for information about Mars, then navigate to the page about the red planet to read about the characteristics of Mars. Along the way, they answer questions. For example, in this multiple choice question, they respond by clicking on the appropriate radio button. Students navigate their way through other web pages, learning what an orbit is by clicking on a link and reading the definition in a pop-up text box, and answering a constructed response question by typing in the answer. They also watch an animated diagram demonstrating the orbits of Earth and Mars, and are asked to evaluate its purpose. The teacher avatar then prompts students to navigate to the Missions tab, where they are presented with both text and images about types of missions to Mars before answering a question about flybys. The last tab introduces students to the rover Curiosity through a set of interactive images. Clicking through the tabs, students explore each of Curiosity's body parts and their functions before answering a series of questions by selecting the answers from the drop-down menus. In the final website, The Gift of Curiosity shows some of the photos that Curiosity had sent back and explains scientists' understanding of what they might mean. Based on the article, students answer a constructed response question about the surface of Mars and another in which they consider the writer's point of view.
Okay, now I'm taking over again. Just wanted to show you a little bit what these assessments are about, and I hope that might be also inspiring for you. As I said, we will have the release on December 5th, and 2 of the ePearl tasks then will be available on the website so that everyone can see what it's all about. And this is our response also to today's needs of students to navigate through the internet and see and find information, conclude. So we think it's a very relevant one for everyone today. I'm now coming to our computer study, which I think is also very, very interesting. We assess the computer literacy competencies of grade 8 students. We did this the first time in 2013. US did not participate. We are now in the next cycle, and we are happy that the US also joined that study. And we are assessing the students' computational thinking abilities. The way we do it is, on one hand, we had larger tasks, actually, where students, for example, had to prepare a post about after-school exercises, and they have to search for information, and then have a presentation on how the breathing system works, and so on. And I must say, the good thing with that one was that the students really had fun doing that one. So an assessment is not necessarily a punishment, but it could be fun, actually. And that study actually showed that it was fun. But of course, we are interested in the real outcome. So we had these one which we scored in a very complex system, and we also had items like this, which I think are also very, very relevant in today's world, like internet security. So they were shown an email and they should answer why that email tried to trick them to give a password away. I mean, something that we probably experience more often than we wish. And so that's also something that we wanted to see how students are prepared for that. And actually, the threat is that they were not well prepared for that, actually. So I'm skipping that. Some of the results, so girls scored higher in almost all countries, which is, well, maybe surprising to some of us, because we said computer is always a male domain. Actually, it's not. Interestingly, the self-efficacy was in the opposite direction. The boys' self-efficacy was higher in almost all countries. I don't comment on that. We saw that computers were frequently used by students in school. And this comes back also to a discussion this morning that I heard about how computers are used actually. And we saw that they were most used for simple tasks, but not really for innovative learning. So for example, we found that the technical coordinators of school reported that in 85% of the schools, innovative teaching software was available, but less than 5% of the teachers reported that they actually use it. So it's not always a question of availability, but it's also a question of if it's really used. And so far what we see, and this is across 22 countries actually, it was all the same. Things are available, but not really used in the way we wish them to be there. What we also found that students were rarely taught how to use computers and navigate in the internet environment. So there was always this myth that students, they play with their mobile phones and they know how to do it. Actually, this is not the case. It needs to be taught. And this is what we really saw. So we see huge differences, larger than probably in other domains, for students with different social economic background. So students don't learn that in school, so they either learn it at home or not at all, but we require them to have the knowledge, which I think is a huge threat across the world. And interestingly, in all countries, the major obstacle to use computers and show them how they can use them, and this is reported consistently by students, principal, technical coordinators, and the teachers themselves, was teachers. The teachers don't feel competent in teaching computer literacy skills and use it in the lessons, actually. There we saw this was reported as a major obstacle. It was not unavailability of computers or software, it was the teachers. So teachers matter, clearly. Also this morning, I was very happy to hear about civic and citizenship education, because also we have a civic and citizenship education study. And we investigate the 8th grade students' civic knowledge, civic attitudes, and the level of civic engagement. And we just completed our 4th study on that after 1971, 1999, and 2009. So we also have a long history on looking at civic and citizenship, since we think looking at education should always have a very holistic perspective. We should not narrow it down to Mars and science and reading and to narrow it to prepare students for future workforce. But education, in our opinion, should be more. So we have this study, and we are just launching the next study. But the good thing is we just finished this one. So a week ago, we launched the results in Europe at a conference. And I will show you some of these results. Sadly, US did not participate, as you can see here. But we hope that this will change in future. So we had 24 countries participating throughout the world in that study. We saw major differences between countries. But what we found remarkable is the differences in civic knowledge varied much more within countries than between countries. And that's something that we see, as you can see, in a lot of countries, actually. We also measured trends between 2009 and 2016, actually. And The positive news actually is that we saw that in a huge amount of countries, we saw an increase of civic and citizenship knowledge of the 8th grade students, which we found very, very pleasant. Some other results, surprising or not, I don't know. What we also found when we looked at trends between 2009 and 2016, we saw that the trust in national government increased significantly across countries. We also saw that the trust in the parliaments increased significantly across countries. We saw that the trust in political parties increased significantly in most countries. And we saw that the trust in traditional media like TV, radio, newspapers decreased significantly in the time between 2009 and 2016. Why is civic and citizenship education important? We saw that in all countries, students' civic knowledge was associated with expected electoral participation later on. And it was negatively related to students' expected participation in illegal activities. So civic knowledge is important. Generally, across participating countries, also we saw positive perceptions of the openness of the classroom climate for discussion of political and social issues. And what's important when we looked what matters, what is related to student knowledge, we saw that, and this was one of the major findings, the degree of the openness within the classroom was positively associated with the students' interest in political and social issues, the students' expected level of education, and their civic knowledge. This was the dominant factor in all countries participating in the study. So I think I'd like to share this with you since these results just came out, so it's brand new. And as I said, I hope that there's also interest in this country in this study. So I try to be very brief to catch up with the time, but I'm happy to and open for any questions later on. Thank you for your interest.
Well, the schedule is going to allow for, thank you, Dirk, very much. That did get us right back on track, and we're going to take a quick break here. But we will start promptly with Petra, and then we'll conclude with Bill Schmidt. So we'll get into some specific sort of current and future initiatives, what's going on in Germany and in China that'll relate to what we've been talking about, and then we're going to open it up. So hurry back. Thank you. Please settle comfortably into your chairs for the remainder of the morning program, which will run until about 12:30, so we have ample time for some dialogue with the board and audience members in this outstanding panel. We're 60% of the way through the panel, and it's just been terrific. And the two remaining presenters, you're in for a treat with both of them, so I'm very excited about that. And first up will be Petra. If we could also maybe, I don't know if we need to pull the doors closed so that I see everybody hustling in now. They know that we're convening. They're excited. They're coming back. But Petra Stannett is up next, and as I introduced her earlier, the Institute for Educational Quality Improvement, IQB. So Petra, the podium is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, dear colleagues. It's always a hard act to follow those international guys, but going back to a single country and the assessment system of a single country, and I feel very honored to have been asked to present the national assessment system of Germany. What I've decided to do is not so much focus on the tests themselves. I don't think they're particularly innovative. We've learned a lot from the international studies. We've adopted a lot of the formats that they are using. But what I'm going to do is focus on the national assessment system as a whole and on the way in which the pieces go together, as we consider this to be really important. And what we also find important and to some extent are struggling with is with the question on how are we going to use those data to actually, how are we using those data to actually improve student learning. So what I will do is I will start by providing you a little bit of background and then move on to describe the national assessment system and briefly also our plans for the future. In terms of background, at the turn, and Andreas knows very well what I'm talking about, at the turn of the millennium, Germany did not have a national assessment system. We thought that basically everything was going well with our input-driven approach to educational governance. We had very detailed curricula. We had very well-trained teachers, so that we thought things were going well. But then TIMSS came along in the late 1990s, and then PISA in 2001, and both studies showed that student achievement was considerably lower than we expected it to be. And also we had, the studies also showed that we had a severe equity issues that we should be dealing with. And this is still in the German media, and everybody in Germany knows what they're talking about, referred to as the PISA shock. What the PISA 2000 also revealed is large differences in mean achievement among the 16 federal states. Back then in 2000, we added a national component and compared the 16 states within PISA. And the results did not come so much as a surprise as most people would have expected or guessed as much that the differences would be large. But having data to actually show it intensified the discussion about standards and the extent to which standards are met. So one consequence was that the so-called Standing Conference of the Ministers of Education and Cultural Affairs of the 16 states, the Länder, that meet regularly four times a year, they agreed on a comprehensive strategy for educational monitoring, which was initially passed in 2006 and then slightly revised in 2015. And it's strictly an agreement among the 16 states without any involvement of the national government. So it's strictly the states. The current version of the strategy encompasses the four pillars mentioned on the slide. There's the participation in the international large-scale assessment studies, and then the last one is a comprehensive educational report that's coming out every 2 years. And but what I want to focus on is what we are doing at the IQB, mainly the two main elements of the national strategy, which is the national assessment studies that we carry out at the system level, which are sample-based, very much like NAEP, and on the one hand, and the school comparison, the so-called comparison tests at the school level, the VERA tests we call them, which are carried out in all schools across the country every year. Both are based, and I think that's a unique feature, both are based on the national educational standards decided on by the 16 states, and they are carried out by the IQB. Now, what's also important to note is that we practically don't have high-stakes testing. It's more or less, I mean, compared especially to what you're doing in the United States, it's low stakes, especially maybe for the policymakers of states with poor results. But the school-level results are not published. They are not used for teacher evaluation or for school evaluation purposes, let alone for decisions about teacher salaries or closing schools. Briefly, a little bit of information on the Institute, on the IQB. It was founded very recently in 2004 as an academic institute. It's located at the Humboldt University of Berlin, and it's financed by all the 16 ministries of education of the states. It's, like I said, it's located at the Humboldt University, which means that we are underlying the principles of academic freedom and, of course, of good scientific practice. We have an interdisciplinary team at the IQB. It consists of psychologists, psychometricians, also teachers, and educational research. And for educational, for expertise on matters of subject matter content, we cooperate with other universities and research institutes across the country. And a lot of our staff are actually on limited term contracts. They are doctoral students and postdoctoral students. So we also do basic research at the Institute, which is really important to us. So in terms of the educational standards, like I said, the 16 states agreed on those standards, and they form the basis of all of our national assessments. They describe, very much like your standards, knowledge and skills students should, as a rule or an average, have acquired by the time they complete a certain stage in their educational career. The implementation, the states decided that the implementation is mandatory in all states, which means that they have to include the standards in their state curricular and in their central school leaving exams. We have, depending on the stage of schooling, we have standards for German language arts, for mathematics, for English and French as a foreign language. And what we do, we keep the sciences separately because that's the way they are mostly taught in German schools, for biology, for chemistry, and for physics. They consist of can-do statements, such as for listening comprehension, for example, in English. This is for 10th grade. Students are able to follow the main points made in longer conversations, understand presentations if they are clearly structured and their complexity is limited, and if students are familiar with a topic. So mostly we try to formulate very concrete can-do statements in these standards. Now, our task at the IQB is to translate these output descriptions, these can-do goals provided by the standards into test items. And eventually test booklets. We currently still carry out our assessments with paper and pencil tests. We're now starting to think about transitioning into computer-based assessment. We're a little bit slow on this because always, and that makes the process kind of slow, sometimes the 16 states have to agree on such changes. And of course, we only test some of the competence domains specified in the standards. Those listed here on the slides, these are the competence domains that we test in these subjects. Orthography, meaning I learned yesterday, that's a literal translation, I learned yesterday that that's not a very common term in English. It exists, but it's not very common. It means it's spelling strategies, and punctuation. So we test these domains, but other domains that are also included in the standards is such as intercultural competence, for example, in foreign language education. Those are clearly not, as far as at least we believe, are not testable, and therefore we don't include them in the assessments. But we do cover a larger range of subjects and competence domains within these subjects than the international large-scale assessment studies do. And we test, like I said, the science subjects separately, unlike the TIMSS and the PISA. And what's also important to us is that the test items that we develop at the IQB, together with psychometricians and educational researchers, they are actually developed by teachers with support from the researchers and assessment specialists, which is really important for acceptance of these testing regimes in the country. Then based on these standards and on the empirical test results, we use standard setting procedures to develop models of proficiency levels. The models describe what students are, with a certain test result, are able to do. And then we use these proficiency levels to report the results. Proficiency level 3 is always the one defined by the standards, which, for lack of a better translation, it's really hard to translate the term. I called it norm standard. And starting from that anchor, we distinguish 4 additional level. And of course, the minimal standard should be met by all students. For example, I give you an example, level 3 for 10th grade, listening comprehension in English, it says, can understand factual information with low complexity on common everyday and work-related topics, is able to understand main propositions and individual pieces of information if the input is clearly articulated and the accent is familiar. So in the south of the, I don't know if the southern accent, would an input with a southern accent from the United States would work here. Like South Carolina, I lived in South Carolina for a while, and I remember how hard it was as a 16-year-old to understand my science teacher back then. And this is based on the European Common Framework of Languages, which made it easier to develop this scale. So then, as I pointed out in the beginning, we construct the tests for basically 2 purposes. One is the system level assessment, and the other is the school level assessment. So we basically provide 2 products to the states. And here's an overview of the assessments in Germany. In addition to the international assessments, about which I will not talk, both of my colleagues already did. These are, and the international assessments are carried out by other institutions within Germany, not by the IQB. So I'll focus on the national IQB assessment on the system level. They are, like I said, they're based on the standards, and the studies we carry out are sample-based with large representative samples for each of the 16 states. Accountable are the state ministries of education and their administrations, so for them the stakes can be quite high depending on the results. The first standard-based national assessment took place in 2009, and it focused on language skills in grade 9, German and English in all 16 states, and as well as French in some of the states. In 2011, we tested German and mathematics in grade 4, and in 2012, we tested mathematics and the 3 natural sciences in grade 9. We're now in the second cycle of the national assessment monitoring studies, and our second report on achievement of students in German and mathematics in grade 4 was published in October of this year. So to give you just a brief impression of the results we report, this slide shows by how many percentage points the proportion of students reaching at least the norm standard, so that the standard defined by the standard booklets has changed between 2011 and 2016. And that was quite a disappointment because the system has been improving in PISA over time, but now it seems to be going backward again. We found a negative trend for Germany overall to the right, Deutschland way to the right, the bar, of about 6 percentage points, up to 10 percentage points decrease in the proportion of students meeting the standard in the city-state of Bremen. The results and a number of other findings like these have caused quite a bit, as you can imagine, quite a bit of attention. And at least one state, the city-state of Hamburg, has already started an initiative that aims at improving mathematics achievement across grades, but also focusing on elementary schools. In addition to achievement levels, we also analyze such things as variance in test results, distribution of variance between and within schools, associations between achievement, socioeconomic background, migration background, gender, of course. And we use the data. We also try to use the data, so we also collect rich background data on students to address issues that are currently of particular interest to policymakers, such as, for example, right now, the system is very much moving forward the inclusion of students with special educational needs in regular schools or in general schools. And so we performed analyses on the question on how well they do in the general schools as opposed to special education schools. At the school level, the school level assessments are also based on the standards, and that's really important to us to have the alignment between the system level assessment and the school level assessment. But they're not sample based. All students in grade 3 and grade 8 throughout Germany participate in the assessments that take place every single year. And the purpose of these assessments is to provide schools and teachers with feedback on where they stand and where they should improve, should try to improve. So the basic and sort of, to some extent, idealistic idea is to trigger a cycle with the feedback from these school level assessments, trigger a cycle of receiving feedback from the tests, analyzing the results within the individual schools, discussing potential explanations for different patterns of results, coming up with strategies for improvement, and then implementing these strategies jointly within school with, preferably, of course, also support from external agencies like school supervisors. This then is expected to affect the assessment results. And like I said, this is sort of an idealistic cycle, and it works more or less well depending on the school, and also pretty much also depending on the school principal and the extent to which he or she is involved in the process. The school level assessment takes place 1 year before the system level assessment, which is 1 to 2 years before the students actually are expected to meet the standards. So these tests sort of serve as an alert system. If the results are poor, teachers still have time to improve them. Now, the individual states, what we do is we develop these items and the test booklets, and then we hand them over to the states. And the rest is up to the states. They do the actual assessment, they carry out the assessments, and they provide the feedback to the schools. So, and their feedback systems differ among the different states. And it also differs to who gets receives the feedback. In some cases, it's just the school. In other cases, the school board also gets the information. So we develop and pilot the test booklets, and we also provide materials for teachers that they can use in their instruction after they have administered the test. The states then do the rest. And this is just one example from the states of Berlin and Brandenburg. It shows, that kind of feedback that schools receive. It shows the proportion of students who have reached each of the proficiency levels depicted here, and compares this with the distribution of the student population within that state. It's not across states, but within that state where the school is located. And some states also provide value-added results that take into account the composition of the student body. So I haven't even received a warning sign yet. Oh, there it is. Well, I ignored one, apparently. So that's good. This is my last slide. And so this was just in a nutshell a description of what we're currently doing in terms of the national assessment in Germany, as we are only in the second cycle of the national assessment. The policymakers, and we are too, very hesitant right now of measuring, changing the measure, because we also have had some issues with the PISA changes. So we are very conservative at this point, and we'll keep it as it is for a while, I think. But we are discussing, like I said, we are discussing changing to a computer-based assessment regime. We're about to start a feasibility study to see how it works, starting with English as a foreign language. And another thing we are focusing, like I said, what is really important to us is the question, how can we improve the usage of the results that schools receive? At the policy level, they are being used more or less, depending on the state, but at the school level, it's all still a question, a debate, the extent to which schools actually use the results to improve teaching in the classroom. And I think this is one of the largest challenges to actually use the results and make sure that they feed into quality improvement. And so some states are developing strategies to better integrate the school level tests into a general strategy of quality development, which is still a big challenge. And what we also, another point I want to point out is that we are also using the international and national large-scale assessments in Germany quite intensively to answer research questions, and that we are also going to try to do in a more strategic way, finding out what is it really that the policymakers are interested in currently, and how can we use these data to inform policy better with using these studies. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Petra, thank you very, very much. That was terrific. And now batting cleanup, Bill Schmidt, and we'll hear about China, and then we'll move into what I think will be a fascinating discussion with these strong panelists.
Unfortunately, Governor, I was fifth, so that's not really cleanup.
I was taking a little liberty there.
You know, they put good hitters in fifth place, so I'll take that.
That's right.
Well, it's my privilege to talk to you about China. And you may wonder why I am doing that as an American citizen, but I've been working with China in the development of their assessment plans. Before I do that, though, I'd like to just acknowledge what a privilege it's been to have worked with both Andreas in PISA and Dirk in TIMSS. A good part of my professional career has been spent in working on international data sets such as TIMSS and PISA, and it's been a wonderful set of experiences. Peggy, I thought I wanted to just add that year 5 are dead on. Having spent a lot of that time researching the U.S.'s performance specifically, I think your 5 proposals, your 5 summaries are exactly what we've learned from that. But I want to take the privilege of adding one, if I can. I want to add a 6th one that actually would go like this. Well, let me give you the background. In the original TIMSS study, the first one, there was a curriculum study which looked at the standards and what teachers did and what they taught in their classrooms. And that 6th one I would add comes from that, which said that basically the U.S. curriculum in 8th grade was neither focused around a small number of key ideas, nor was it particularly coherent, reflecting the logic of mathematics. It was hither and yon, helter-skelter, and not very well organized. And in fact, we developed an international benchmark in that study, which when we then compared our 8th graders, we found them to be 2 years behind. Now, the metric is not what you're used to, the test performance. That metric was 2 years of instruction. That is, while the rest of the top achieving countries were focusing on algebra and geometry, we were still doing arithmetic. And so it was really hard for our students to perform much better in a test that was representing all of those domains, arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. So I would add that one because I think it's so central and so important. But the question is that the states have responded. They have changed their standards to reflect this. That's one of the great things that came out of that research. But where are we? Well, if you look at the results presented here from either PISA or TIMSS, we're not really where we want to be. And so the question is, where are we on this dimension of our standards and what we expect of our children to perform and to know? We don't know the answer to that question, but fortunately we have an opportunity. Countries do. OECD is starting a new study called 2030 to address the question of what are the standards like and what should they be in the year 2030. And that study would give us another opportunity to compare our standards if the U.S. chooses to join that particular study. And while I'm at it, I would take the opportunity, since I've never spoken to the NAEP, I think that it's really important that you think about the possibility of collecting more information about what it is that students study when you measure them in eighth grade or at fourth grade. That's a piece of information that's sadly missing and makes the interpretation across state performance somewhat more difficult because you're limited as to the opportunities to what you might put to as an explanation for those differences. So I would just pitch for that since I'm standing here. I hope you don't mind that. But now to the task I've been asked to do, which is to look at and help you understand a little bit about a major economic force in the world today, which is China. And where are they in this respect and where are they going? So I'm just going to talk about these various features. All right, the first thing I think we have to do to understand the Chinese system is to look at a little bit of history, because it's not that long, actually only 40 years, since China embarked upon having a uniform, complete system for all, comprehensive system that is required of all students. So it's taken them about 40 years to finally reach that goal, but they have now the 9 years of compulsory education. When the first TIMSS study was started, China joined and in fact sponsored one of the organizing meetings around that study, but only participated in the curriculum aspect in terms of what they were teaching. They didn't feel ready to join in the performance assessment as well. Now that they have this in place, their concern is looking at the quality and equity issues. They're very concerned and very sensitive to the equity issues, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes. So what they're trying to do, and I think that what's really interesting here is the educational quality. Every system is concerned about that. But the student's holistic development, this definitely reflects the Chinese culture, that what's really important is the whole of the student. And they are very concerned about that development and not letting it become a testing society where they perform well on the tests, which many Asian countries are particularly well known for. They have built their system based on their experiences with TIMSS, PISA, but most importantly, and I think somebody earlier said this, I think the secretary, that this is the national assessment in the U.S. is the gold standard. China recognized that and built its system. You will recognize many of the features of what I'm about to describe as being characteristic also of our own national assessment. And that's been a central guiding feature of what they have done. In fact, in knowing that I'm here talking about this, they have asked me to talk to you, Governor, about the possibility of them wanting to come and share some experiences with NAEP with respect to what they're doing, because they're very interested in moving ahead and staying with the United States in the way it's organized. So basically, it's about, these are the things they've set up in the mission for what they want to do. And it's not just monitoring the standards, but it's also about research. They're very interested in doing something that has not been done very much in China, which is to use the data in a research sense to try to figure out what best works for the students, the Chinese students. They're interested in exploring all different kinds of things. What have they done? For 8 years, starting in 2007, they did, for 7 years, they did different kinds of pilots to see what they could do. So over this span, I know this is very small, but you can see that they did different combinations over that period of time of Chinese, of mathematics, and other areas, PE, physical education, And they did sample runs, developing their items carefully and testing their procedures and building their understanding of those procedures. I'm going to talk more about that as we go on. But in 2015, they actually came to the point of being ready to actually launch the first official National Compulsory Education Quality Assessment System and to give the first test. It was conducted in that particular year. So what we have here is that there are 2 years of work that has been done around their national assessment. And as you can see in that particular slide, it was in 2015 and 2016. And you can note there that they are taking a very large task on as they deal with, there are 31 provinces in China. They are now at the point where they are actually measuring every one of the 31 provinces. So unlike some concerns about some of the international data, where the Chinese data is only representative of a small region, mostly the urban areas, the other thing you need to understand about Chinese society and the way it's structured is that the wealthiest live in the city, dead center in the city. And as you go further out from the city, the SES level decreases. So it's pretty much the flip side of what we have in the United States. And so the rural and the most outer ring of suburbs are the lower SES members of the society. So they sample, their sampling unit is counties, not the provinces, but they make sure they have a number of schools in each of the provinces so the provinces can be represented by their data. And you can see here they had 6,500 schools, 70,000 teachers that they collected data from, and around 200,000 kids per year in each of those assessments. The one thing that you need to understand about their assessment system, I know in the US we do math and science every 2 years. They do, but pretty much you have some kind of an assessment each year. They also do assessments every year. And it's a massive task for them to get this ready to be able to pull it off. And I think this is the most interesting part that you're probably interested in. What do they test and at what basis and what kind of performance expectations do they have of the students? Well, as I said earlier, they want to avoid this test-oriented image, and so they're very interested in making sure that doesn't happen. They are also involving themselves more and more in the international arena. They have done, we already know this, if you look at the PISA results, you can see 3 sections of China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Shanghai being included there, but nobody feels that those scores represent the Chinese society as a whole. And so they have been going into this very gradually, and we just have some data that we are able to share. I didn't think this was the context for that, but on 10 provinces, one of the very largest of the provinces down to one of the smaller provinces. And those data are from the PISA study so that we can get an indication, a broader indication of the performance level of Chinese students at 4th and 8th grade. And those results are going to be released at the American Educational Research Association meeting coming up this year. The subjects they test are 6: math, Chinese, science, physical education, arts, and one that I think is very interesting, moral education. They actually have an assessment on moral education. Because remember earlier I pointed out to you that their interest is in the holistic development of the student. So they are focused on that area as well and actually have a test of moral education. Probably, from my understanding, reflecting Confucius and some of the other great thinkers of the Chinese philosophers and thinkers of history. They're interested in 3 levels: knowledge, problem solving, and also contextual information. It changes with each study because the focus of each study is different. So they try to make the contextual information specifically relevant to that particular subject matter, not trying to develop trends over time on background information, but making the background information very specific to the subject matter, which I think is a very clever and important idea, because then you better understand the performance on that particular area, which the background information wouldn't necessarily be the same across different subject matters. They also are interested, especially in physical education and arts, in performance assessment. And I'll show you that in just a minute. This is the cycle they have that they're in now. They have two subject matter areas they test in each year. And they're on a 3-year cycle of pairing those two things. So you can see the current cycle, the first and second year is what you saw earlier in 15 and 16. This year, right now, they're doing third year, which focuses on science and moral education. And then this cycle goes. And what the cycle is not exactly the same. The pairings will be different in the next 3-year cycle. They put the different subject matters together in pairs over their testing period. Mathematics assessment framework. People are very clever with the colors they put on slides, but some colors just don't let you read very well what's behind it. White fades nicely into that violet or whatever it is. Anyway, you can see that what they're in the math frameworks, nothing's that surprising. Operations, various things in reasoning, and they have they look at the emotions and attitudes around mathematics as a part of that. This is PE, where they get a lot of that, what they call a questionnaire, because they're asking them about their physical activity. But they do have a spot test, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Let's look first at the framework for the arts. I thought this was very interesting. If you look at this, they try to get at 3 aspects: the knowledge, appreciation, and performance, which you get to actually doing something. So the knowledge is quite broad. They want them to be aware of Chinese as well as other countries' major classic works in art and music. And they want them to actually have a deeper understanding of the elements that define those 2 domains. So it's a knowledge test. But then they also want to see how much they can evaluate the various genres, the forms, and things, the emotion of music, which I thought was very interesting, in their ability to sense and appreciate that which comes from different styles of music. And finally, they actually have a performance component here where they're actually expected to sing or create some kind of sample melody or rhyme. And the other side of it is they also need to draw upon their own artworks or to develop something as a part of this. The scoring of this is, of course, a very interesting task to be able to accomplish. But they actually have gone into this, and they actually have these performances that are required of the sample. That last point on there I think is important. As I said earlier, the background information is specific to the topic that's being studied. So they ask things about their involvement in various art activities, not generic questions of a background sort. What's the sampling design? Well, their basic first stage sample is a county. It is not the province. So they select, there's 31 of the provinces, and they then take and get the counties throughout the country. I think counties are pretty much what counties are in America. They're just regions within the provinces. Provinces that are like our states. And they basically then get six counties in each, at least 6 counties in each province, and the overall sample represents about 10% of the counties. They draw the schools with PPS sampling, obviously to account for the fact that the sizes of the schools can be quite different. And they take more than 12 elementary schools and 8 secondary schools per county, from which they then draw their student sample. And then they select the students, both 4th and 8th grade, more than 30 students per school, and that gives them something like 3,600 students per province. I think that means per school. And they design this so as to have a standard error sampling rate, error of a smaller amount. This is one of the interesting differences between the United States and China. They have, this is what they report. And if you look at the provincial, they report the academic performance by province and by municipality level and the factors that it might influence, but it's not published. This is not public information because the Chinese, and I probably could get in trouble in saying this, but the Chinese, as a communist country, are very concerned about issues of equality and inequality, as you might expect. And so they're very sensitive to any differences among the provinces because everybody knows those provinces are not of equal social class composition. And therefore, they are not wanting those data to be available. The data we have on the 10 counties, I still don't know what 10 counties there are because I can't be told that, I'm told. So it's a very interesting environment in which to be a researcher when you want data to help you understand something and you ask for, well, how many 15-year-olds are there in that county? And apparently that's beyond my pay grade. So I don't get that information. But they will publish the national results. Therefore that will become available. And as I said earlier, and I'm done with a couple of quick comments, that of course, just like any of these things, the mean is 500 and the standard deviation is 100. So if you look at those, you won't know anything in a comparative sense outside of China. But they are very concerned about that and involving themselves more and more in the actual PISA study. The 10 provinces that I have access to is given out, but only when I cannot report those data other than just say 10 provinces. And that's the limit of the country right now. But they are, I think the plan is for them to participate more fully as a country as a whole in the very near future, and in which case the data would become public, the overall country score. So it's a very interesting system. It's restricted by the situation in which it exists, a political situation, but more and more they are trying to be open and sharing those results beyond their own borders. Thank you.
Bill, thank you very much. I think that this has just been an outstanding set of presentations this morning and probably have put together or put in front of the board a number of very interesting questions and points on which we will wish to pursue. Let me ask just first of the panelists if anybody wishes to add to the comments that have been made or respond to something that's been in one of the other presentations. You might like to make a point regarding something you said. If there's not, we'll open this up right away here, but I do want, Dirk, go ahead.
Thank you. Since, Bill, you mentioned also the curriculum analysis, and just to mention, we still do that also in TIMSS because we believe in the curriculum model of looking at what's the intended curriculum, the implemented, and the achieved curriculum also in TIMSS. And also one of the outcome of the 2015 TIMSS was when we looked at 20 years of trends also in math and science curriculum, we saw tremendous changes. And we saw in some parts some convergency, but it was very interesting to see that in nearly all countries in these 20 years, curriculum have changed substantially. So I think that's definitely an important point always to consider, also when you look at assessments, of course.
One thing I might ask for everybody, when you're speaking into the microphones, get them a little closer because they don't necessarily pick up the sound if you're back away from them. And I know for some of the folks in the audience it might be a little hard to hear, and I don't think he can turn the sound up quite enough to catch us if we're too far back from the mics. So if that'd be for the panelists and everybody out there. So let's, I see a card is up from Governor Geringer, so let's go to you, Jim.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of the panelists. I'm just trying to do a quick sort and say which question I want to ask first, because I should probably only ask one. Make it as broad as possible.
We have about an hour. We might get back around once or twice.
Is that just for me?
Yeah. No.
Thank you. Well, it's a target-rich environment. I feel like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I know, that was really bad. The one thing that I was struck by with all of the panelists was a focus to go beyond just the testing and the data, to pursue the analysis, to discuss, and then strategies for improvement that were at least inferred, if not actually discussed. And it brings me back to our strategic planning activity for NAEP and NAGB. And I've always summarized it this way: because of NAEP, this happened. And we are constantly searching for that as a result of what NAEP helps administer. And I particularly focus on how we can develop a culture so that people use not only our results, but are motivated to secure even further results that can provide for the strategies for improvement, and then to track the implementation to see what the trends are. We are measuring trend, but we don't always know why. And it's the why that improves research. And I wonder if, particularly the holistic approach that China takes as an example, if there's something that might be missing, because what I glean from these comments, these presentations, is a challenge for us to do better, not just with our assessments, but the results of our assessments and how it improves student achievement. So I wonder if there could, if any of the panelists would like to respond about how we might improve in our approach to not just report, but to actually cause a change which leads to student improvement, if you'd like to address that in any fashion.
What I'd say to the panelists, if you want to, Andreas, I see you making a note. Are you ready to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I think this has actually been the principal motivation of PISA, to provide countries with concrete tools to actually leverage improvement. And that's where the contextual data comes in. And I want to sort of reinforce also one point that Bill just made. The most valuable information that we have, you can study the intended curricula, we do that all the time, but it's actually the implement curricula, the opportunity to learn, what are students actually exposed to. That's the kind of data that actually speaks to teachers in the classroom. Why do students in some countries are so much better on certain task types than others? What does that say about the instructional learning environment and so on? And for policymakers, the same. If you just know where you are, but you do not have any indications of why outcomes are less good or better than in other kind of systems, studies like this can only give you pointers. Then you need to sort of open up the data, combine it with, triangulate with other types of studies, initiate research to find the deeper answers, but I do think that's a crucial kind of benefit of these comparisons. That's why PISA has become such a powerful tool for policy change, really, because it is connected, the outcome data, with the context, triangulating data from students, from parents, from teachers, from schools, from systems, and I do really think that's a very, very important part of this work.
Let's go to Petra, then Bill, and back to Dirk.
Yeah, I think like I mentioned in my presentation, this is really something we're struggling. This is scary. Could you turn this up? Thank you. This is really something that we are concerned with within the German school system. So, and a lot of times policymakers tell us, well, you give us this feedback on where we stand and how things have changed, but we don't really know why, and we don't really know what to do about improvement. And, when you were presenting your data, I was sort of smiling inside, and, what is the consequence that we draw about schools, class size? Well, if we went back in Germany and says we're going to increase class size, that would be not a good thing to do for a policy maker. That would basically be suicide. So, I think two answers probably. One at the system level, but I think is really important. And we saw these negative trends right now in Germany, and the states are discussing where did this come from. And what we know is that the composition of the student body has changed due to immigration, due due to the inclusion of students with special educational needs. And the question is, have the systems responded enough to these changes? This is something we're discussing. But what I really think what is really important is that between the cycles, between the assessments, we do evaluations of whatever changes are implemented within the system to get a better idea of whether what is being done helped or didn't help. At the school level, I think what's really important is that the feedback is used, the schools are supported. A lot of times what happens is they get the feedback about where their students stand, and then what happens? Then they are on their own pretty much. And I think that's a real problem. And so what I think Hamburg, the city-state of Hamburg is a good idea, a good example where they provide feedback on a regular basis. And this is being discussed, not as a high-stakes test, but being discussed with the supervisor, and then the question is, what do you need to improve, and what kind of support do you need in terms of professional development within the math teacher team? So I think that's really important, helping schools to use the results and in terms of improving their teaching.
I would like to just add a comment in support of what Andreas said. It was a good illustration and specific to the United States. In the PISA 2012, we had a good measure of OTL. Now, one thing you have to remember about PISA is the use of mathematics in solving real-world problems. It's an application, whereas the TIMS is more of a school-based sort of sense of where they are at 8th grade and so forth. So the question is the United States, what we found, let me say first, what we found generally, which I think is very important, because some people have advocated that to improve our PISA score, the application of math, we need to have math taught constantly in applied context. Well, the data from the PISA study is very revealing. It says what's really important to performing well on a literacy test is your background in mathematics, the formal mathematics, school mathematics. So it's not to cast that aside, as some would propose and have proposed in the United States. And in fact, we found there is an added effect for the amount of time and experience you have doing applied problems. That still counts. It adds on to what you get from your formal school math. But the point is, if you go too far and too much, the relationship is not linear, it starts to drop off. So that at some point, we don't know what the point is, you begin to lose when you do that. And in the United States, we found something very specific, which I don't know the answer to. It would demand, as Andrea said, further research. The applied problems had that kind of impact in most countries. It didn't in the US. Why? That's a really important question, because it addresses the one you're saying. We need to know where to go from those results. Why is that? I can only conjecture. I suspect it's because the quality of what we call applied problems in this country is very different from the quality of what are applied problems in other countries. But again, that's what we need to know. And that's why I took the opportunity to say that such data would be very valuable if it were collected around NAEP. So you could actually begin to think about what those results mean from year to year or across states.
Sure. How to make better use of the data? I think there are three components. One is you need more analysis and more support. I mean, internationally, we do some analysis, but each country should do its own analysis to understand better what's in the data. And I think all these huge data sets are heavily underused. So I think you need to support research in that. Secondly, we need augmented research. We do cross-sectional quantitative research. So in terms of having causal interpretations, we are all quite limited in all these studies. So I would also say you need also some qualitative research and other types of research to better understand the mechanisms behind that. And I think last not least, there's always the huge problem of translating research results into policy results and also make it usable and available for practitioners. In the 90s, we had these studies and we collected data and the reports were research reports. Now we try to target also more policy, but still I think we struggle all in translating research results into policy languages that are usable and understandable easily to policymakers. And we see this definitely as one of the areas where we need to improve, but that's clearly one thing where we still need to improve further and also make use of data more for practitioners. Thank you.
We have 4 on deck, so I've got a superintendent and a teacher coming up next. I think we should, Alberto, you were next, and then we'll go over to Dale, and then after that I've got Tyler and Andrew. And if you wish to direct your question to one member of the panel, that's fine. And to the panel, going forward, we may or may not need all to comment, but I don't want to restrict comments if we do, because I do want to try to get the exchange back and forth here. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one question and a couple of very brief comments. Number one, very intrigued by the revelation of Portugal and its progression over time. Being a native of Portugal, very proud of that. Of course, during the break, it was pointed out to me that my removal from the pool may have enhanced Portugal's performance. But on a more serious note, as I attentively watched and listened to the presentations, I think this board stands to gain some insight on our ability to be more effective to the nation in terms of the way we present our data. And something that this group has discussed time and time again, which is just the presentation of data is insufficient if we do not dare to tie it to a national focus, policy, and best practices. Where are they? Who's responsible for them? And can they be replicated or amplified? I think there was a clear message throughout all of the presentations. Secondly, it was clear to me that there was a unifying thread that connected high-performing nations, regardless of the assessment that was discussed. And these are often counterintuitive to some of the practices and policies that as a nation or as states we have embraced over the past 20 to 30 years. I'm not criticizing it, it's just there's a huge delta between what some are doing with better results and what we believe via policy they're to do. So this insistence on avoiding teaching to the test, this insistence on avoiding high stakes, so severe consequences, and I was impressed by what Petra spoke of, and this insistence on quality versus quantity of teaching, and that to me was very, very obvious. My only question is actually more towards Dr. Schleiger. I've always been interested in understanding, considering the high level of demand and data-driven decision-making and publication associated with your work, why is it that cities are reported side by side with nations? So I don't think that the United States of America could get away with saying, we're only going to publish Massachusetts results or a district in Massachusetts. Why would your organization accept simply Shanghai, mainly when the point was made by the last speaker that there is a significant decrease of SES status as you move away from the core of the city? So it's always been a mystifying concept. I would like your thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think actually, first of all, I think your point on quality versus quantity of teaching is a very pertinent one that comes through all of our data. I was just sort of one caveat on the issues around teaching to the test. In fact, most high-performing education systems do have high-stakes exams, but the stakes are typically high for the students and they're low for the schools and they're low for the teachers. That actually avoids the teaching to the test because there's no incentive for a teacher to narrow the teaching, but there's every incentive for the student to do really well on this test. So that's, I think, the big difference between the US and other countries. We have looked carefully at the prevalence of testing. There's no evidence that there's more testing in the US than in other countries. In fact, the opposite is the case. You find many European countries with a lot more testing than the United States. But typically, It's more about students, it's less about using tests for looking at school or teacher performance. On your question, I think it's a very fair point. It's very hard to make international comparisons. Some countries, like Luxembourg or Iceland, you can barely find on the map, but there are nations, and the United States and China are very large kind of entities. The exception that we made for China was a transitional one. It's for us, and the problem is more on our side than on China's side. It's just very hard to get quality kind of data from the whole of China. We have to proceed only gradually to basically step by. We started with Shanghai, and then we are now four provinces underway. We're working on 9 more. It's going to take time until we have covered the whole country. The same is true for India. We started with 2 states. The problem was really, we want to ensure that we do not compromise the technical quality of the data. And in large countries, it has been a challenge. So that's it's a transitional measure. That being said, I would not dismiss the results from Shanghai easily. If you look at the socioeconomic composition of the province, we're not just talking about a city, we're talking about a whole province. It's socially probably a lot more diverse, certainly when it comes to income inequality, than you'd find in the United States. There are very, very poor people living there, and there are very wealthy people living here. And I think what we can learn from the province of Shanghai, that even the poorest kids get an excellent education. You compare similar students across the United States and the province of Shanghai, and you find actually there's a lot we can learn from how that province has been able to leverage good results consistently. It's also been able to reduce between school variability by half in 6 years. I think you're absolutely right. It's not appropriate. International comparison that's just fraught with these difficulties. What you might call it, you could say Europe is a kind of country. Now, why would you want to compare the different states of Europe? I take the point, but it's basically a transitional.
Dale?
I enjoyed seeing the scenario-based task from Tim's. Being on the Assessment Development Committee for NAEP, it's interesting to see how it compares to the scenario-based tasks that are coming down the pike for NAEP. My question is, in terms of Tim's and PISA and NAEP, has there been or could there be in the future sharing tasks? Specifically, I'm thinking scenario-based, but doesn't have to be, but that would help us in the links that we're always talking about.
Andres, I don't know, or Dirk, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, in fact, I should say that this is something that many OECD countries are already doing. They embed PISA tasks in national assessments in order to facilitate kind of anchoring of the kind of metrics. There are many, many examples for that, and we support that. We would, make our tasks available for that. And with the digital new assessment, scenario-based assessment, so it's actually really easy to do that, as a kind of embedding of the task. So from our side, we'll be very happy to support any efforts.
That kind of embedding, if I can just follow up on that, what does that require, or what impact, say, were there to be more embedding, say, in a NAEP test? What does that, and we've got a lot of experts in the room, I'm not one of them, so how, to get that kind of validity, where do you, I guess maybe both Peggy and Andreas, what would it take, or what would be very different?
The first, and that's, in my view, the biggest challenge, is to ensure there's compatibility in the constructs, that you're measuring similar things. That's basically looking at the frameworks. If you have assured that, you don't need that many tasks in terms of embedding. When we face the same issue in PISA, measuring change over time. I mean, all of those linking approaches are similar, but I think the big challenge always is the construct the same, is the target population the same?
I would agree that a construct is at the higher end of the priority, and making sure that you are measuring the same construct. But there are other considerations, how we actually administer our assessment. We have a platform, we call it NAEP, and there are certain standards that have to be met. So embedding other scenario-based tasks into our platform would take some work, but I'm not sure that we should worry ourselves with the logistics and the technicalities of it just yet. I think considering the construct issue would be at the top of my priority.
Dirk, you.
Yeah. Since this was also, I think, directed to me, I'd like to respond. Two things. One is that what I showed there also was one from Pearls. In Teams, we have also more interesting scenarios that we base on that's really experimental and science. And I hope I'll be able to show something later on if we develop that further. The question is always, what do you want? Why do you want to embed something in there? You won't. It is difficult to get a direct linkage or projection of scores, since an assessment is more than a collection of items. It's also how you administer it and so forth. But I think all these items can be definitely used also as an inspiration to develop something similar. Also, if you have a different platform, you can also easily develop something similar. And this is the way we think about it. So I think that's probably, and I think this is where the world is going, because we need to see how we make it interesting also to students and how to collect data. And honestly, it's a challenging job. The development of these items. It's easy to have something for the children to play around, but that's not giving you the information that you want. So it's really, really hard work, actually. Yes, and I think I agree we should, of course, exchange more on that. But it's the way where we will go, but it's a challenging part, too.
Peggy, final comment, then we'll go to Tyler.
I might add one other thing. When we examine the items in these international assessments, right before we release them, actually, we always do alignment studies, both at the content level. We want to be able to explain to our constituents why we see differences in the findings when the constructs are, at least on the surface, are being purported to measure the same thing. Tim says it's measuring math, and NAEP says it's measuring math, but why are the findings looking different? We actually do comparisons with the items as well. Now, not a scenario-based task, which I heard you ask, but we also look at whether in a blind study, an expert can discern whether or not an item belongs to a NAEP or to TIMS. And quite honestly, the NAEP and TIMS look very, very much alike. Not so much some of the other assessments, but certainly those, because they're measuring, as Bill pointed out, there's more of achievement as opposed to a literacy assessment. So I don't want to say that we have gone too far down this road in terms of how to sort of put them in the opposite or the complementary assessments, but we're not blind to the issue and the possibility that this is something we need to think about. And as an agency that's responsible for funding all of these assessments, we're looking for efficiencies. If we can share item pools, particularly when the constructs are purporting to measure the same thing, then everyone wins.
All right, Tyler.
Thank you. My question is for Petra and for Bill. Petra, in your remarks, you indicated the effects of immigration having a downward effect. And my question is how are you thinking about designing or dealing with student mobility effects going forward? And would be something like maybe subgroup reporting based upon a certain number of years within a school system, for example, might be a control. How are you thinking about it? And my guess is in China, although my experience in China is that there wasn't a whole lot of student mobility when I was there, but that's a coming thing, and for them for sure. And what are you planning for in terms of designing their system?
Yeah, yes, we are. I mean, Germany has the student proportion of students with immigration background has been increasing over the years, and to different degrees depending on where you are in the country. So in Eastern Germany, the increase is very slight, and the overall proportion is small. But then in the city-states, of course, you have a high proportion overall, and then there are some states where it has really increased considerably, like in Baden-Württemberg, which is used to be a high-performing state, but now has decreased proportions of students meeting the standards. And I think it's not so much taking into account this kind of student mobility within the assessment. I don't think that's the way to go. But what we see is that all groups of students have decreased performance achievement in not only in math but also in listening comprehension in German. It's all groups. It's those with immigration background and those without immigration background. So we do look at those groups separately. And I think what's really important to do is the question, has the system responded to these changes in the composition of the student body? And I think it hasn't in the degree that it should have, such as German as a foreign language or as a second language. I think this is something we can learn really from the United States a lot. You have a lot more experience with this. We have invested a lot in teaching students with limited German proficiency, but I think that needs to be done more systematically, especially now with the additional immigrants having come to this country with very limited knowledge of German. So I'm not sure if that addresses your question completely.
Well, no. I guess my question was: is there a potential for subgroup reporting based on how long you've been in a specific system? For instance, in Hamburg, 3 years in Hamburg.
Oh, you mean within Germany? Mobility
right.
Within Germany.
And so that you're only really focused then on what I mean. In San Diego, I always said that if we flew 10,000 kids in from Massachusetts the day before the NAEP test, we'd do much better.
Actually, the answer is no to that. It's not a big discussion, this kind of mobility, but we should think about that. But we don't have any data. We don't ask students, where have you been going to school before you in the last 4 years, for example. And mobility is less high than it is in the United States, but no, we couldn't do that.
The short answer for China is yes. There is a great deal of mobility, but it's a special kind of mobility. The Chinese, as well as I understand this, I'm not an expert on China, but basically you are born, and to stop the migration that was occurring to all the cities, you are identified with where you were born, and you're given an ID card which places you in that environment. However, you can move to one of the bigger cities where jobs are more available, like Shanghai, and then you can work there. But then your children can go there, but in any kind of assessment, like the test to determine who goes to high school beyond 9th grade, you have to go back to take the test where you come from. So there are 3 categories of people, as I understand it. There are the locals. There are those who are living there because they're living with a relative. Their parents are back somewhere else. And the 3rd category is the parents have come to work there and the kids came with them. And that information is known, and they can report and do keep track of. I don't know how publicly it is, but among the staff there, they do keep track of those categories and the performances within each of those categories. So it is something they recognize because of the uniqueness of the way their system works.
Andres?
We actually do that kind of subgroup reporting that you suggest in PISA. We measure how long students have been living in the country. We also measure their social economic background very carefully. And therefore you can see and partial out those kinds of effects. But what is most interesting is that those effects vary enormously across systems. So some immigrants from some, population groups can be a drag on your performance, but that drag varies across countries. We once did something really interesting. We looked at the country where people come from and the country where they go to. And you could look at what's the effect of the source country and what's the effect of the host country. If you get an immigrant from China, it's different. You get an immigrant from Pakistan, and so on. But we found actually that the effect of the host country is much larger than the effect of the source country. You take immigrants from similar subpopulations, similar social backgrounds, depending where they're educated. And I think this is where comparisons become really interesting, because they tell us this is not an intractable issue. This is really an issue that is quite susceptible to public policy. Some education systems are just very good in integrating people very quickly.
Very good. Next, I think we've got Dr. Ho, who I was reading that, one of he's done a lot of research in this area. He was a principal investigator on which I thought was pretty interesting, on the framework for subscale level comparisons of NAEP and state testing results using metric-free gap and trend statistics. So for the panel, you can expect a very perceptive question coming here. So,
is that my CV you've got on my phone over there?
Yeah. I haven't gotten into the details of the paper yet. But Rebecca, is that your card up down there? I can't quite. I don't know. Somebody's got to.
I've got my slides right here. Is anyone interested? Or
it's all on the internet. Go ahead, Andrew.
So I'm interested in a question you all receive a lot. So maybe I'll direct this to Peggy first, but I'm interested in the difference between correlation and causation, right? And so three terms that you may have heard. Steve Glazerman coined misnapery. He called this misnapery, right? When good data is used for purposes, for inferences that the data really can't support, right? I think it was Leanna Hayton at EdWeek coined malfeasance. You get it? Malfeasance, PISA in there. And similarly, right? It's like when you assume correlation is causation, it may be that socioeconomic status would make a difference if we just increased everyone's socioeconomic status, or maybe it's some other hidden factor that we aren't measuring that is actually leading to that association, right? And then we got to get Tim's in there, right? So this is Tim's aggressions, right? So instead of transgressions, Tim's aggressions. So anyway, these three words I think are a big concern in the sort of researcher community, right? And at the same time, I think a provocative correlation, a provocative association, can spark a conversation that's extraordinarily healthy, right? So I mean, maybe I'll start with Peggy, just because I feel like you haven't gotten in. I'd like you to. I think NCS is among the most conservative of everyone sitting at this table when it comes to not showing correlations, frankly. And I just wonder what if there's a rationale behind that, and then if others want to chime in, how do you sort of balance the importance of having this conversation with the limits of the data for giving us clear answers about what to do?
Well, you're very perceptive, as I would have guessed. We try to stay out of the modeling business on purpose. We've gone down that road a couple of times, and I got into some very difficult conversations about what variables did you put in the model? How well measured were the variables that you have in the model? What other plausible explanations could be discerned from these data had you included a different model? And this is even beyond the actual modeling methodology, whether it's HLM or something very model-based and acceptable in the community. It has more to do about, the judgment that goes into those R&D type of activities and what a statistical agency can legitimately defend. So, how we have reconciled this issue is to do the best job we can in measuring various indicators, and do a rigorous job in including those indicators in our data collections, so that when we put them in these restricted use data sets and these open source data sets, individuals like you, researchers like you, have a better chance of conducting these type of analysis. So our goal is to provide the data, and like I'm hearing here today, picking up clues about what types of things I should be including in our measures. Not that I'm necessarily going to go and take them and do some modeling with them, but my role is to support evidence-based policy practitioners with good, solid, rigorous data.
Petra?
I just want to answer that because I think we are also very conservative in that regard. And what we try to do is keep separate, on the one hand, the monitoring and just giving feedback about where the states stand, what are the strengths and weaknesses, and where do they have to try to improve with whatever measures they think are adequate within that state. And even within the much smaller country in Germany, the traditions are so different between the states and what works and what doesn't work. I think that's really important. So what we do is we give this feedback in terms of monitoring, and then we discuss the results and potential causes of why these changes may have come about. But we are very clear at communicating that this is just hypotheses that we can develop, and we're never claiming that these are the explanations. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that we'd use the data to do basic research. And for example, try to use the data to look at what are the effects, for example, of including students with special educational needs within general schools with propensity score matching, etc. But we are very careful to communicate that this is basic research that we publish in scientific journals, and where we need cumulative results to then eventually maybe come up with an answer to the question, and not just based on our data, but on other studies, on qualitative research, et cetera, to come up at a bigger picture. And I think this is a really, really important line to be drawn between monitoring and what you give provide in terms of feedback at the system level, and as a basis for discussions within the system, and on the other hand, the basic research where you have to make sure that the causal, that you're careful in terms of what are your causal implications, what are the limitations of your studies, and be very, very frank about the limitations. For example, these results, if you look at subsamples, and that's subgroups of students, a lot of times the sample sizes become so small that I would never draw conclusions, for example, about Turkish students living in Austria and living in Germany, because first generation students, you have like 23 in the sample. So that's, you have to be really, really careful. And that, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Can I ask the panel, Andreas, you cited, Portugal was one example where they made a big leap forward, but should we be disappointed that in all of the measuring and the testing that we've done, we really haven't been able to maybe take populations in deep poverty and move them forward, that the response of policymakers has been inadequate to the task? Or Bill Schmidt, when he's talking about whole child in China, is there something different coming there where we're finding something that is being missed? Is it the social emotional development piece that, again, for someone coming from these children in these immigrant populations could be just persistent poverty, because the end game here of all of this is to see improvement, and we are still in this country and in other countries seeing a lot of lagging.
I think that is true. At the same time, I'm also very encouraged by some of the results. In my country, Germany, for example, when the first PISA results come out, people were very disappointed with the very low performance of immigrant students. Actually, 10 years later, that performance gap has been almost cut by half, because actually it has stimulated people to think about policy solutions. But also what drove this was the recognition this is not inevitable. We do have countries where similar immigrant groups did so much better. And I think this brings me back to your question. I think it's absolutely fair. I mean, the answer really is, I think modeling is important. I also think it's a great way to engage the research community. But we need to be always clear about how robust the findings are, to be very transparent about how much weight you can load on the findings. If you do not do those kinds of analysis, policymakers will end up throwing a coin. If you cannot offer them really good hypotheses, you'll actually get the worst case scenario, that you get a random decision. So in a way, I think there's a tension between doing something that's relevant for policy and that is still robust. What I should also say, it's often the correlations that have thrown up interesting hypotheses and stimulated us to improve our methods of data collection. For example, when we started with PISA, we had only student data and a little bit of context questions. Then we saw, well, actually, we need to know more about teachers. We integrate that perspectives. We need to do more about parents. We put that perspectives. And now working on longitudinal data sets. So I do think actually sometimes it's the correlation and the modeling that actually stimulates the improvement of the instruments.
Bill, I saw your...
I want to address your question about the improvement with respect to kids in lower social classes. I'll do this really quickly because I know we don't have time for other questions. But we did a study using the PISA 2012 data in which we looked at the social class inequality. And you would think that one of the central roles of schooling, which is what you're asking, which is how do schools actually have a chance to improve the performance of these kids from low SES? The startling result is across all the OECD, 33 countries, is that, 35 now. It keeps changing. And across those, essentially the average inequality that comes through schooling is about a third. So in other words, schooling is not helping to reduce the inequality because the opportunities to learn important mathematics, I'm talking math, is essentially related to the social class of the kids. The kids that come from wealthier backgrounds get the better math. The kids from the poorer social class get the less demanding math. And that inequality sits in a stark, it's almost unbelievable. We keep fretting about this. In the United States, it's almost 40% that inequality comes through schooling, where it's supposedly to be leveled off or reduced. And so you have that basic fact, which is one of the things, Governor, that I think is sitting in the way. Schools are not taking really, for all, seriously. I'm sorry, I get a little passionate about that.
Rebecca, I think is that your card up? I can't.
That is, but
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got Alice right is up. I thought it was up. I saw one up on this side first, but I thought then I'm over. Alice, you've got yours up, right?
All right.
Okay. Then you're next, and then Linda.
Oh, Linda's been up for a while too.
Oh.
Okay. Well, all right. Very quick. Thank you so much. I thought 3 hours for a panel. Oh my gosh. It's not enough time. So this is fantastic. My question is really about inclusionary practices. So as NAEP has done a really strategic effort to include students with that have special learning abilities. And so how do you see that change in the countries that you are testing over time?
Dirk, I see your...
I think there are two things actually. One is that we see that inclusion of students with special needs is something that happens globally. So that happens in almost all countries actually that we are working in. But of course I think there are two important things there. One is that when we looked at the teachers and asked them for what are their needs in terms of professional development, there were the two most mentioned things was one was familiarity with computers, and second was how to teach students with special needs. So these were also by teachers recognized as the two most important. So it was among them actually. And the other thing, I think it also draws some more requirements to our assessments actually. And I think with the computer-based assessments that we go in, there's huge opportunities also like having lenses or something like that in a digital world. So I think we can also there accommodate also students with special needs in a much better way than that's been done in the past, actually. So I see also there is options and clearly needs, and it puts, of course, pressure on all of us here. We are sitting on that side to accommodate that. Thank you for your question.
Peggy was going to make a comment, and Andreas, and then we'll go to Alice. And I'll also mention that after Alice and Linda, if Bill, I don't know if there was anybody online that had a question, but you guys could bring that up, or we've got the audience too. But I did want the digital world out there to realize that they could ask a question, but I don't have access to those questions up here. Okay, Peggy, and then Andreas.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and declare that...
Wait a minute. Peggy Carr is going out on a limb. Noted here. What time is it? 12.
I'm going to declare from where I sit, NAEP is out front and leading the industry and including students with special needs. I get to see what is happening with these other assessments when we go out and administer these assessments in this country. And there's always this lack of agreement about accommodations, the proportion of students that are included, and NAEP is far ahead. Even when we talk about DBA, Dirk, we've done a yeoman's job, I believe, not only in terms of including accommodations in our platform, but also universal design, which I think we all are happy to see. So, this is a win-win situation if we can learn from each other, but this is one of the places I want this board to know. We're out in front.
Andres, go ahead if you like. Quick comment.
Yeah, no, actually, we have learned a lot from NAEP and accommodating students with special needs. But I think the fact that we are increasingly able to cover them also shows us how different inclusion policies really are. And, often we say we put more resources into students with special abilities, with special needs. But in fact, most of the data show that is quite different when you look at actual implementation. Yeah. Still quite regressive often. And also you have to keep in mind what countries consider students with special needs can vary hugely. Yeah. In Finland, every student will at one or other stage through their career become a special needs student. It's basically permanent diagnostics. It's not labeling or stigmatizing certain groups, but it's about teacher permanently finding out what can I do to give additional support to students with needs. So accounting for that is difficult, but the more we can actually capture this with our assessments, the better we can understand how inclusion actually works in the classroom.
Representative Page.
Thank you. This is building a little bit, I think, on Andrew's question. I was wondering what it would take and whether it would be advisable for NAEP to try to provide the kinds of data that the PISA provided on a state level. I ask that because Massachusetts got PISA results on the state level, and there was a tremendous amount of data provided and presentation made to legislators that did result in a lot of very provocative discussion and about what potential policy changes might be appropriate given our focus on trying to close the gap. So I appreciate that correlation is not causation, but nonetheless, I think the more information we have, the better the discussions are about, at the end of the day, what can we do to improve the performance?
Very quickly, I have to say NAEP has been the gold standard for many, many years, and primarily because we have done a really good job in measuring the domain, the subject domain of interest. We have not been so good at measuring these contextual variables, and you can see it when you look at PISA. But I will say that NCS and this board has made a big step forward in the past cycle or so in looking at including more measures, turning these indicators into constructs, putting in modules that we are rotating in and out. So we're getting better, but you're absolutely right. I think we can learn from the model here about including more contextual variables.
Linda Rosen.
I first want to thank the staff for organizing such a fascinating morning, and to the panelists for giving us so many rich ideas. Bill and I remember when TIMSS stood for Third International Math and Science Study, and even when SIMS didn't have science at all. So I'm sorry, Bill, I'm showing our age, but and Bill has been both a general and foot soldier in the area of international comparisons, which we've greatly benefited from. So I have 2 points that I think are related. One is Americans seem to live, and this is a generalization, under this veil of oblivion. Andreas showed us that with wanting to be a scientist and doing well in science. We always see these survey results where parents say, well, no, American schools aren't good, but where my kids go is super. So there's a very big disconnect. John and I were talking a little bit last night about how you communicate the results of assessment. So that gets to the constituency that I represent, which is the business community, and they'd be saying, well, what's the ROI? What's the return on investment for all of this work in international comparisons? So I'm wondering what advice you would give NAEP for, at least in the United States, the fact that you're sampling on NAEP and on international comparisons. And it's so easy in America to say, well, the problem is elsewhere. And the reluctance, which you've made clear, to go too far in drawing a conclusion. I mean, it feels like it's a downward spiral, and I'd love some ideas how to get out of it.
All right, who's going to tackle that one first? Andreas, it looks like that's headed your way, or Dirk. I don't.
I think there are a couple of different points that you're making here. And I always see that national assessments and international assessments are quite complementary. So I see that these perspectives are clearly necessary. With respect to international assessments, in NAEP, we are very, very careful with any causal claims. We have always reviews of all our publications, and if there's something in them, that's out. But I think what is important actually is to see what happens in other countries. And sometimes you see that some countries are doing better or have results that look better, and then that gives you the idea what are the differences. And I think the same is probably true for you with NAEP, because you have different states. I mean, you have a huge country. You're a continent, actually. So you have a lot of differences also, which could be used actually as an opportunity also to compare of what works. You have your own experiment, actually, of educational systems, which actually is what we are looking at also. And the other thing that I think is also very important is to see what are similarities. And actually, it's usually very surprising to countries and participants that they say, well, we have a very unique problem, and our situation is very unique. And in our country, it's very different. And then you do the analysis, and you see, it's the same in 20, 30 other countries. So it gives you also another perspective about problems and relationships. I mean, what we saw, for example, in our computer study, that the bottleneck for teaching and implementation of computers in education, the bottleneck was reported as it's mostly the teachers and their self-confidence in using and applying that. And before that study, everyone said, oh, we have a very individual problem. And we could show, no, it's all countries having very similar problems. And I think this is also sometimes very reassuring also for policymakers, for practitioners. There are things that are different, and there are things that are very similar, actually. And to pull that out and see what is it that we are just thinking and what is actually true, I think that's very important and relevant.
Andres?
Yeah, Linda, what you see actually is very reflected in PISA as well. There's a gap between self-concept and actual performance in the United States. There's a gap between self-efficacy and performance, the degree to which students believe they can make a difference. In 2012, we asked students, what is going to make you successful in mathematics? And the majority of American students say this is about talent, I can't do anything about. 9 out of 10 students in Singapore will say, if I try really, really hard, I trust my teacher is going to help me and I'm going to be successful. So self-efficacy is very important. But here the story gets interesting. We can see in the United States that is reinforced by grades. Teacher marks actually are overinflated. And in a way, that shows you where the answer really lies. It really lies in telling people more of the truth, really, early students, giving them the signals. And this is where the high-stakes exams come in. I can see all the kind of negative kind of questions around exams, but they are very powerful tools. If the stakes are high for the students and low for the school, they're actually very powerful tools on giving young people a good understanding, what they're good at and what they're not good at is. I think that's something that my observation of the United States, the big difference between the US and virtually all high-performing education systems that have some kind of structure that is giving students that kind of message. When it comes to our sample-based assessments are not the right tool to this. They don't have the granularity. They are about helping us to understand the big factors. They're not speaking to individuals. We did, however, something really interesting in PISA. A few years ago, we started giving schools the option to take a school-based version of PISA. And it was very actually interesting. Once I got a phone call from a principal of a charter school in Arizona who was telling me, well, everybody told me I was number 4 in the United States, and now you tell me I'm at the 25th percentile of students in Shanghai. And actually, those kinds of messages are very important to have really reliable reporting.
Bill Schmidt on that 25% ranking.
As I sit here and listen continuously to this statement of Massachusetts, I feel really compelled to say something. Andrew's comments contributes to this, and so does what Andreas just said. I'll just give you a piece of information to think about carefully. So Italy and the United States in the 2012 math PISA were essentially within a point of each other. I mean, literally, 4 to something to something. It was just 1 or 2 point difference, okay? Massachusetts was way up at the top. Florida, as a separately participating state, was not so high up, below the average. Well, you go to Italy, that same country that was comparable in performance at the country level. I went and found an area that's comparable in social class and wealth and all those other dimensions, Milan. Guess what? They were almost identical to Massachusetts' score. And then I found something comparable to Florida. And they were almost the same pegs on the distributions of the two countries. You couple that with what I said before about school inequality, and there's an alternative hypothesis which constantly gets in the way of us really understanding what's going on and why schools are not working so well in the United States.
Bill, did we have an online question?
We do. Yeah, we do have an online.
So this question is from Camille Stegman from the Nevada State Teachers Association. Do you believe that large-scale tests can be made to assess three-dimensional learning, as is found in the next generation science standards?
Bill, do you want to?
Yes.
In a word, yes.
I work with a colleague at the Michigan State who was one of the authors of the next science, next generation. And they are doing that, and I have seen that, and it's quite brilliant, and I believe it is doable.
We've got anybody in the room, we've got a burning question that you've just been.
Stefan's got a microphone here.
Oh, there's one. Here we go. A former NAEP member, I believe, rising.
Andreas, economic is a key word in your title. Can you talk a little bit about the countries that have improved? Is there a correlation with improvement in closing the skills gap and improving the economy of the country?
Yes, absolutely. You can see fairly strong relationships when you do historical growth regressions. You have to put the time lag in, though. Now, for example, you can't equate today's student performance with today's economy, but the United States actually is a perfect illustration. You know, if you look 2 generations ago, the United States was sort of fairly much on top, and that is where the economy today builds on. And Korea is another very powerful illustration. You know, in the 1960s, it had the level of economic development of Afghanistan today, one of the least developed education systems, 5,000 people going to high school. Today, it's at the top of the league tables. And actually, there are researchers. The Hoover Institute in Stanford does that all the time, trying to look at, you know, test scores, how they relate in growth regressions to economic outcomes. There are lots of this is where the causal kind of nature of the questions really comes in. Yeah. But, you know, I think there is good reason to believe that skills are one of the most reliable predictors for long-term economic performance. Our PIAC data, where we actually test adults, skills in the workforce, they give you a very interesting cross-sectional perspective on this. Basically, you look at earnings and skills, far better relationship than with degrees and qualifications. In fact, you'll be surprised how weak the link between the skills people have and the degrees they got once actually is, particularly when you look at older generations. I think there's good reasons for us to look into this.
Andreas, while you've got the floor, let me, I see Joe's got a question. I'll get that in. We'll make, probably that'll be the last one. But I did note, I don't know who all got one of these, but I saw in this handout, it's a little bit off our topic, but it's a IELS, the International Early Learning Study that's coming out in first data collection 2018. I was curious if that test, since we've talked about how to get kids off to a good start and we're spending a few billions in this country, would that then be used to validate or not all of that early childhood spending that's been going on? Because there's been a claim that that'll help kids go to school. I think the phrase is ready to learn, but we haven't actually seen all of that readiness giving us significantly higher results since we've been at it for more than a decade. I've been waiting to see a real boom in those fourth grade scores. And give me a relationship there.
You know, first of all, actually, this is where PISA comes in as well. You know, you can actually see that among 15-year-olds who had an early childhood education experience, even after controlling for social background, you do see significant performance gains. So there is actually, and there are also longitudinal studies which actually suggest that. However, this is hard, I mean, and the other point I want to make is that OECD countries have seen huge progress in expanding participation. You know, 10 years ago, the average participation rate in early childhood education and care was 35%. Today, it's 70% among 3-year-olds. So there has been huge, but nobody knows what the values actually is that has been generated. That's where this study comes in. It's actually the very first international study looking at early learning outcomes. And the difficulty here is that you can't give, 5-year-olds a test. You have to basically create play-based scenarios and also put much greater emphasis on the social and emotional outcomes than on just the cognitive outcomes. And I think that's what makes this really, really hard. But we're working on this, and we are very confident that we'll, in a couple of years, have a good instrument on the table.
Is the U.S. participating in that?
Yes. In fact,
one of the pioneers.
You and I were talking earlier about what Congress was interested in, and would they give us money for things that we wanted to do. This is one of them.
Good. Okay. Joe, I think you're going to get the last question. We're about 2 minutes left to go here, so.
I'll try to keep the question brief anyway. K-12 education in the United States is often referred to as a very loosely coupled system. I'm not even sure a system always works. With the advent of No Child Left Behind and then subsequently Every Child Succeeds Act, Every Student Succeeds Act, it's clear that the state level standards for what is expected of students is common across, each state has that, and it's relatively common across states at this point in time. However, the curricular materials that students see and the scope and sequence that occurs within individual school districts varies widely from state to state. There are some states that are very state-controlled and other states that are extremely loose with regard to what local school boards can do and even what individual high schools, for example, can do with regard to the course of study that students are expected to take and so forth and so on. I wonder if that is how unique that is for the United States, or is it relatively common in other countries? And I would guess, Bill, you might have observations from China, and Petra from Germany, and Dirk and Andreas from different countries. So it's really a question of, is this one of those features of education that is unique to the United States, or is that just something that occurs everywhere?
Andres, and then if Bill or Petra want to join in as well.
Yeah, actually, when you look at the distribution of decision-making responsibilities, what is unique about the United States is that it's actually not that much influence at the state level, it's at the district level, and that you don't find in many other countries. And what you are talking about is really the heart of it. You know, the intended curriculum, what you write into state standards actually only becomes meaningful in the kind of instructional settings and materials that students see. That's the implemented curriculum. And if you actually look at this, you take the opposite extreme, Japan, they have one mathematics textbook. But it's one that is actually developed collaboratively with very strong involvement of the teaching profession. It's not, just dropping down from the sky into the system. It's actually one which the whole profession works on and the whole profession refines every 10 years. There's basically a 10-year cycle between, these are the new ideas, this is how we use them, how we translate them. That's the other extreme. And most countries are somewhere in the middle, but the United States is actually pretty much at one extreme in terms of leaving teachers and districts a very high level of discretion in terms of the implemented curriculum.
Petra?
I think this is a really important question, and in terms of in Germany, what we used to have is highly restrictive content curricula that were really clear about what teachers were supposed to teach in terms of content at what point in time in the educational career of a student, and then the competence-oriented approach came into play after the PISA shock, and so we started thinking more about what students should be able to do, and in that regard, and then the states were, we had the standards, and the states tried to implement those standards, and some went very far in terms of letting loose, leaving it up even to the schools what to do in terms of contents. Others were kept being restrictive, such as Bavaria, very conservative, and that sort of is now being calibrated, I think, in more in the middle, or again going more towards the content, content plus competencies, and I think that's really important because I think a lot of schools can really some schools can deal with this kind of freedom, but a lot of schools are struggling doing this. And so I think, in the final analysis, having good materials, excellent materials that is constructed by experts is a better way to go in the final analysis. Yeah.
We've got Dirk and then Bill.
Well, I would like to make 3 comments. One is, I think you made a good point, which is that there's sometimes no coherence between different learning projection. And this is actually what we see also in a lot of countries, actually. And it's clearly an area that needs improvement, actually. Second, we also see, also in the TIMSS data, huge connections between early childhood education and the results at the end of grade 4. So that's confirmed again and again, I guess. And the third one actually is that we also conducted an early childhood education study. And what we found actually is that this is one area of education where we see the most changes currently happening, I would say, last 10 years, and we see it also continuing. In a lot of countries, we had the early childhood care, and now it's moving more towards early childhood education. And this is a trend, not only having more students enroll there, but also having a different focus on that. It's not taking care of the children while the parents are working. It's really seeing it as an opportunity to get students to a point that they have an easy entry in primary education, and also an opportunity, and that gets also, I think, back to your statement about students coming from lower socioeconomic status, students with immigrant status that are not proficient in language, so to get them up to speed so that they can benefit the same way from primary education as others. So I think it's currently one of the most areas of education that's really in transition everywhere.
The answer for China is relatively simple. No, there's not much variation. And to my methodologist friends over there, I also would point out there's no such thing as non-response. It's a beautiful system. Neither at the school nor at the individual level. Let me just quickly make a comment about the United States. When we did the original TIM study, the third international math science study, one of the conclusions that came out of that curriculum analysis for the U.S. was it was the most awful system in terms of any consistency. The textbooks varied enormously from each other. The standards varied enormously from each other, the state standards, and the teacher implementation thereof was just drastically, by orders of magnitude, more than any other country. I think that what I now believe from more recent studies we've done is that's narrowing. There's less variability because of them, as you said, the standards are fairly common now in terms of what they have in them. But I think at the other disappointing part is at the implemented level, the teachers. We gave them iPads for a whole year. They recorded their instruction. And basically, we found tremendous variability, again, both in whether it was covered or not, how much time you spend on it, and what order you spend on it. And the order is not so arbitrary in mathematics. So, I think it's one of the heart and core problems of us getting better. The standards now are more reflective of the international benchmarks I've done. But that's a real problem, is that implementation. It's just nowhere consistent. And the textbooks don't reinforce, they reinforce the splintered vision that it's just spread all over, because the books themselves are that. Can I add one quick comment? I wanted to say this earlier, and I mean this genuinely from my heart. One of the things that when I was involved heavily in that TIM study, and it comes to a point that I want to make to all of you, I had a governor who was totally involved in it and listened to me. I had more contact with that governor than I have since, and that's Governor Engler. This is a man who loves data, is driven by it and not driven by ideology, and so you're in for a ride with him.
Well, thank you. Bill, we stopped 30 seconds too late. Thank you. Very nice. But I want to thank Bill and Petra and Dirk, Andreas, Peggy. This panel's been terrific. You probably don't know it, but it's actually 12:36, I think it is here. So we even went a little bit over, but what a great job they've done. So let's give them a rousing thank you from the NAEP. They've given us a lot to think about, and we'll have a chance to do that in about 15 minutes, 12:45, so a little less than 15, the committee meeting start. And for the NAEP members, I believe you actually get lunch. The rest of you, you're on your own. And we'll have that to take up much of the rest of the afternoon. But thank you, and thank you for the great questions from the board. We are adjourned this session.